A very good evening to you, and welcome to the first programme in a new series of After Dark, which will be on air every week from now until the autumn, the only live, open-ended discussion programme on British television. During the programme, there will be commercial breaks, and the conversation will continue during those breaks. But if anyone says anything that's crucial to your understanding, don't worry. We'll recap when you rejoin us. A final thought before I introduce tonight's guests. If you'd like to appear on a future edition of After Dark, there's a telephone number you can ring in the TV Times. I'll give you an address at the end of the programme. Now, this morning's independent newspaper carried a front-page story headlined, "Masons Pull Out of TV Debate with Policemen." The story referred to this programme. Tonight we're discussing Freemasonry and the role it plays in Britain's police forces. We'll be asking, is there a loyalty beyond the law? Since the programme will feature serious allegations against Freemasons, we, of course, invited the United Grand Lodge of English Freemasons to join our discussion. We received this letter from their Grand Secretary, Commander Michael Hyam. It says, "We are generally willing to discuss Freemasonry, but this is a matter which must first be dealt with by the Metropolitan Police." We took Commander Hyam's hint and approached the police. Scotland Yard sent us this letter. It says, "No serving officer in the Metropolitan Police would wish to take part in Friday's programme." Now, we felt it's important before beginning this discussion that you should know who declined our invitation to appear on this programme. So, here goes. The following Freemasons declined our invitation: Michael Hyam, John Hamill, John Bickford Smith, Sir Ian Percival, Kenneth Helps, Christopher Starnes, Alistair Ingham Clark, Colin Gregory, Peter Glenn Williams, and Sir John Stebbings. The following police officers, or former police officers, declined our invitation: John Imbert, John Stalker, Sir Kenneth Newman, Sir Robert Mark, Sir David McNee, Pat Kavanagh, Commander Thelma Wagstaff, and James Anderson. Chief Constables Michael Hurst, Frank Jarvis, Brian Johnson, and Roger Birch. District Assistant Commissioners Cree, Davis, Figgs, Innes, Evans, Congdon, and Wells. From the Police Federation, Tony Judge. And from HM Inspector of Constabulary, Mr. Charles McLaughlin. We also invited Home Office Ministers Douglas Hogg and Lord Ferrers, as well as the Home Secretary, the Right Honourable Douglas Hurd. They all declined our invitation. The good news, I suppose, is that the following people did not decline our invitation. Chief Inspector Brian Woolard, 33 years a policeman, recommended for 7 commendations. He was instrumental in cracking the Angry Brigade in the early 70s. 10 days ago, Brian Woolard was suspended from duty, the victim, he says, of a Masonic plot. This afternoon he received some news which I'm sure he will later share with us. Canon Ian Hunt, like many senior members of the Church of England, Canon Hunt was an active Freemason until he resigned from the Brotherhood for reasons which he will doubtless explain to us later. Martin Short is a journalist who specialises in the murky areas of organised crime and police graft. He is perhaps best known for his TV series Crime Inc. and is currently writing a book on the Freemasons. T. Dan Smith was a business colleague of the notorious architect John Poulson. Mr. Smith has never been a Mason, but he may share with us his experiences as an imposter Freemason. Sir David Napley, an eminent solicitor whose notable list of clients have included Jeremy Thorpe, Princess Michael of Kent, and the family of disgraced millionaire banker Roberto Calvi. Mr. Calvi, you may recall, was allegedly murdered by members of the infamous Italian Masonic Lodge known as P2. Sir Colin Woods, as Deputy Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police in the mid-70s, he was Sir Robert Mark's right-hand man. Few policemen knew more about the workings of the Met. Sir Colin, who has now retired, is the chairman of Securicor. Eileen Gray, awarded an OBE for her work as a sports administrator, she also sits on Kingston Borough Council. Eileen Gray has a secret, which is why she is with us this evening. Let me begin, Brian Woolard, with some strange artefacts. A pair of white gloves, an apron, and a sword. Let me ask you a question. What part did items like these play in your downfall?
I have no idea. It looks like, could be Masonic regalia, but whether those items had any part to play in my downfall, I have no idea.
If not these specific items, and if these are Masonic regalia, what part did the Masons play in your downfall?
Have you got about 2 days to spare?
We've got a lot of time, a lot more time than most television programmes.
It's a long and very weary story, and it's one which, when I have to relate it time and time again, as I've had to do over the past few years, I find it boring because you have to repeat the detail over and over again. And the usual effect is that some journalist or television person will come and knock on your door and say, can you tell me what it's all about? About half an hour later, they'll start to look at their watch. An hour later, they'll start to fidget. And it's one of those stories which really is boring in the extreme because it's so repetitive. I think that the best way of starting is to say that for 27 years of my police service, I was aware that Freemasonry was evident in various branches of the force, but I treated it as something of a joke. And the reason I treated it as a joke, because I didn't really pay much attention to it. I thought it was like any other interest that somebody might have, which to them could be quite important. But as far as police work was concerned, I couldn't see that it had any relevance in that area. What changed my opinions was that in 1981, when I was transferred to the company fraud department, I found myself working in a commercial area of fraud. And I was given an inquiry to conduct, which was really a very, very insignificant inquiry. It was quite a small sum of money, which was the subject of an allegation of fraud. But it had aspects to it which were, to me, quite strange. And they were that the person who was the complainant had in some way been compromised by the man who was a suspect in the case, because he told him stories of his contacts with people in high places, or to him who were in high places and important, who were individuals in the police service. And the suspect had recorded these conversations. And it was quite obvious that the suspect intended, at some stage or other, to use that material, which he did. When he thought that the complainant was going to make a complaint to the police, he produced a tape recording and said, I suggest you take this to a quiet place and play it. And when you have done so, reconsider. Now, the man quite obviously was shocked to hear his own voice on the tape recorder, and his own voice relating things he had said had happened, because I was told they were events concerning police officers and others within his lodge. The wife of the individual who was the complainant suggested that he should take the matter forthwith to the police, which is what he did. At the police station, he was seen by the CID, and they took a statement from him in which he said that the whole story which he had related to this other man was a complete and utter fabrication, and he only did it to frighten the man because he wanted his money back. The papers went up to the yard with the tape recording, and they duly went to the complaints department, and they were returned to the station from which the inquiry was being made, with the comment that quite clearly there was no offence because the man had said the whole thing was a fabrication. And in due course it came to be passed on to the company fraud department. It was insignificant in value, but the extent of the involvement of other individuals clearly put it outside the area of the division for inquiries to be made. They were extensive and they would have taken up a lot of police time, and it seemed appropriate that the matter be dealt with by the company fraud department. As a result, I found I was given this investigation to conduct, and it was given to me in a way where a senior officer came into my office, closed the door, said that he had an inquiry which he wanted me to conduct. He wanted me to be long-sighted about its completion. He expected me not to take more than a week to complete it. And he said it involved tape recordings of people who were in the same lodge, the complainant and others who were police officers. And he gave me the package and said it had to be at all times kept under lock and key, and that the material in the package was such a sensitive nature required that it was not left unattended. And then he asked me which lodge I was in, and I said I wasn't in any lodge. Following on that, I went through the routine processes.
What was his response when you said you weren't in any lodge?
He didn't say anything. He just looked at me and gave me the package. Well, he handed me the package before he asked me the question. Following on that, I did the routine identification of the suspect and eventually discovered that he had a criminal record. In searching the criminal record office, I found that the file was missing. So I did a trawl of the indices of New Scotland Yard and eventually found other documents which built up a picture of him.
Of the suspect?
Of the suspect. And I discovered that he'd been first arrested in the early 60s, the late 60s rather, for a number of offences of fraud, and that he had obtained, the sentence was probation. I don't know if he pleaded guilty or not, I can't remember now. The officer who had arrested him was a detective sergeant of the company fraud department, and he was the same senior officer who had given me the inquiry to undertake. Other documents came to light which concerned a complaint which was in the Complaints Investigation Bureau, and I had to seek authority to get the file. And I discovered that it was a complaint of alleged corruption concerning an officer who was then a detective inspector. And it was the same officer who, in fact, was the senior officer who gave me the case to conduct. I submitted the tapes to the technical laboratory of New Scotland Yard with a view to authenticating their integrity for submission as evidence. When the senior officer discovered that I had done that, he became very annoyed and asked me what the hell I'd taken that action for, because it could involve a number of officers, some of senior rank, some retired of senior rank, being dragged into court unnecessarily, and of course their characters possibly being besmirched as a result.
Did that surprise you that he said that?
It did, because I regarded the tape recording as a piece of evidence which showed mens rea on the part of the suspect. He had gone to the length to surreptitiously record a conversation for no apparent good reason other than the fact that he was going to use it to bring pressure on the individual, the complainant, to stop him going to the police. And I felt that showed knowledge on the part of the suspect that he was up to no good. And that evidentially would have been useful as to his state of mind. The other factor was this: if there was a statement in existence that the tape recordings were a complete fabrication, or the content of them, there should be no reason why any police officer should fear that information being presented in court, because it could be said that this man made these things up.
So what was your conclusion then as a result of all these remarkable events?
Well, I was pressurized during that inquiry to an extent that I'd never been pressurized before in any other inquiry. And this worried me, and eventually I went to the head of the company fraud department and I asked him for a transfer for personal reasons, because I felt that the officer who had given me that inquiry and expected me to complete it within such a short space of time, which was professionally impossible, had some ulterior motive for so doing. And I wanted to place as much distance as possible between me and that officer, because quite clearly he was going to be my senior officer for perhaps another couple of years or so. And I felt that I wasn't happy in working in that environment. The difficulty was that the head of the company fraud department said it was difficult to place somebody of my rank at short notice in another position when he asked me where I wished to go. And I said, quite frankly, I'm happy to serve anywhere away from here. And eventually he said, would you be prepared to go to another department within the department? So he posted me to one, which was to the public sector corruption squad within the company fraud department. And that geographically, I suppose, was as far as I could get away from the senior officer concerned, because it was on the top floor of the building.
Scotland Yard?
No, the company fraud department is at Holborn. It's quite a large building, which is based at Holborn Police Station. But when I got to the public sector corruption squad, I found that quite a number of the inquiries there involved people who were suspects and who seemed to have something in common in the way of association of Freemasonry. And I suppose the reason for that was that many of them were local government officials. And in that environment, perhaps it was more endemic than in other areas. And one of the inquiries I was given was one that I had, which had progressed perhaps for several months before I came to be posted to that squad. And I took it over, so to speak, in midstream. And I learnt that the suspects in the case, many of them belonging to the same department, were Freemasons, and that they shared a common lodge with two company fraud department officers. The information came not from my own inquiries, but from within the local authority via the Deputy Chief Executive. And what concerned me was that I didn't know the identity of those company fraud department officers. And it may have been a matter which was relevant or not, but it was something which I had to be conscious of during the investigation.
Sum up for us then, in 2 or 3 sentences, what the nub of your allegation or your concern really is.
My concern was that I was removed from that inquiry when I had interviewed a very senior official at that local authority, and another official who I intended to interview took immediate absence of leave after I interviewed the first official. The reason I interviewed them was because the Deputy Chief Executive of that authority said to me that they had both obstructed a private consultant brought in to measure and cost work on a particular contract, which was the subject of the investigation.
But is your concern just about that local authority, or is it wider?
Well, the knowledge that I had at that time, of course, was very limited about Freemasonry and also Freemasonry within local authorities. And it was as a result of interviewing the senior official and the other one going missing that suddenly a number of telephone calls received at my place of work. One of them was from a senior member of the company which was under investigation, and another from an official of the Director of Public Prosecution's office. Both asked for me by name. Both were making inquiries about my inquiries. And I was concerned lest the interviewing of the other officials, who were both Freemasons, had sparked off some Masonic interest in my inquiries, which I should pay some heed to.
Why should you pay some heed to it?
Because if it was a relevant factor through association within that local authority, the senior official that I interviewed was also said to be associated with another official who was a prime suspect, and had in fact meetings with him at a lodge near where they both lived. And the suspect seemed to have led something of a charmed life from my investigations with regard to disciplinary offences against him, and would appear to have been protected by the finance department within that authority. My concern was that if there was some outside contact with the Director of Public Prosecution's office, which stemmed from within that investigation and from people within that investigation, and perhaps people who were suspects, I should get to know a bit more about it. And I went to interview him. But in going to interview him, I was in a bit of a dilemma, because I would have to seek authority for that interview and the nature of the interview. And I suspected the deputy head of the department, from which I'd asked for a transfer, to be an officer who put his interest in Freemasonry and protecting police officers before that of the diligent completion of an inquiry. So my dilemma also was the fact that I did not know the identity of the Company 4 department officers in that lodge, and I didn't know at what level of the chain of command they in fact worked. They may have been at a lowly position, or they may have been at quite a senior position. So what I elected to do was to go and see the Director of Public Prosecutions official, ask him how he came to make inquiries of my office, not through the normal channels of procedure, which is by official report, which goes over to the yard, and then comes over the Company 4 department and is placed on file, and then you give a short written report and reply, but by means of a telephone call. And I determined that after interviewing him, I should immediately report the matter at the highest level in the police service, because if I was avoiding the chain of command within the Company 4 department, that was a serious matter, and therefore it should be reported at the highest level. And that is what I did. I went afterwards with the officer who accompanied me and reported it to the Commissioner's office. And that afternoon, within hours, I was taken off all my inquiries and subsequently posted from the CID to the Uniform Branch.
Sir Colin Woods, do you think if you had been Brian Woolard and you had been undertaking the kinds of inquiries that he was undertaking, and you were approached in those kinds of ways, would you have been disturbed, troubled?
It's odd. I've never been approached in that way in the 40-odd years. Can I do a couple of corrections? There's a very nice man who's chairman of Securicor. It would be most odd to hear that I've got the job, and I haven't. I'm chairman of a very small part, the consultancy company. And the other general point I'd like to make is you mentioned some good friends of mine who aren't sitting up all night with us, and I can think of so many reasons why they wouldn't wish to do that. They may think I'm extremely odd for being here, and I would understand that as well. And so I must rush to their defence, because what we're talking about are interpretations that one puts on events. You have put in your presentation a sort of interpretation that this long list of people aren't here, for which I see a very sensible thing. Bob Mark's 70 years old. I'm here because he passed the name along. And at his age, I wouldn't really want to sit up. Well, it has to be said.
Yes, no, I understand. But I mean, equally, both the police force and the United Grand Lodge could have sent somebody along had they chosen so to do.
I'm sure some of them have the reason. I'm just objecting to the inclusion of some names for which there are such obvious explanations. Because I think it's a point to be made about how one interprets it.
You've made it. Tell us about...
Well, I find myself terribly inhibited. There's this officer who's suspended. I don't know what he's suspended about. I don't know why he was taken off of that case. And so I'm now asked to go into a guessing game where, if certain things were said to me, and it's rather like me listening to... I've heard some worrying things in my service, generally worrying things about which I've been generally worried. This particular context... Now, I don't know much about Freemasonry. It seems very odd to me that one officer doing something like this to another officer would assume he was a Mason without knowing, because I thought they all went around giving each other signs and things of that sort. So I find it all, Brian, you know that I'm not trying to do anything that is not exactly as it should be. But because of all of those reasons, I find it quite impossible to imagine myself being in that position. But I'm a very odd policeman. No one's ever offered me a bribe. I've often wondered what it was that, when it's all going on around me, and thought perhaps I'm not giving the right
I think I could help you there. I've been offered 2 bribes. One was a shilling and the other was £1,500.
Yes. Well, neither of them really worth it, were they?
No.
Yeah. So I can't visualise. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to duck the issue, only to the extent that I wouldn't want to be out of order.
I think the question, the thought that was in my mind was this. Clearly, there may well be an enormous amount of dispute over whether the story that Brian tells is the truth or not. I simply make this point. If he is telling the truth about those kinds of approaches, and somebody were to approach you in that kind of way, would you be disturbed?
Well, can I put it this way? I thought it's important when I took on responsibility for the CID that there shouldn't be any secret informants. Now, that was a great culture that you wouldn't tell anybody who your informant was, which is all rubbish, really. But I did understand that some officers might have a special relationship and they might have some difficulty in certain in-house situations. So we had a rule that you had to tell somebody. And if you couldn't trust anybody on the way, I'm sure the Home Secretary wouldn't mind in the end, you know. The idea of reporting up where there are difficulties, particularly sensitive difficulties, seems to me the answer. And if Brian went along to the Commissioner's office, he couldn't do more than I would expect anyone to do. But the consequences I can't explain.
You mentioned earlier on in your answer there that you did see certain things within the police force that you found troubling. To be precise, you said, in my career, I have seen some things which are troubling. I presume by that you meant within the police force, amongst police officers.
Well, there are people, yes, there's all sorts of people join the police. You know, some of them by practice get to be quite wicked.
By practice?
No, yes, I mean that's how people get to be very
they
wicked. They practice it. I think most.
They succeed.
I've sort of parted with officers in their career, and it's surprising how often it had been said to me by someone who was leaving that they wished they'd had the present rules were applying when they first begun.
I'll tell you something strange that I've heard policemen say in the past, that they have seen corruption, illegality going on, and they have reported this to their senior officers, and they have said things like, make sure that those relatively lowly police officers are not promoted. Why do policemen say things like that and not make sure that those relatively lowly police officers are prosecuted?
Well, I spent my life trying to prosecute them, so I don't know the answer. There isn't. I don't think there's any really secret corruption. I think certainly anyone who's bought a policeman seems to go and boast about it to all his friends immediately. And I think Robert Mark, who has been mentioned, has made it perfectly clear quite a lot of people decided to leave. For evil to triumph, as I'm sure you will agree, it's sufficient for good men to do nothing. And there's a lot of good men doing quite a lot, but not all. Because that would be impossible to hope for, really, wouldn't it?
Eileen, let me move on and ask you something. These implements, these things that we have here in front of us, are they, in your view, in a sense, the toys for the boys? I mean, are they, if you like, little more than the implements of a silly game?
I wouldn't know. I'm not a boy. Haven't you noticed? You've got all these boys round here. You ask them.
What do you think, then?
Looks very attractive to me. You've got enough boys round here. You ask what's toys for the boys. You ask me a sensible question and I'll answer you. I feel very inhibited, actually, because I must confess, and probably I've been rather busy lately, and maybe I'm the only person in this community that isn't aware of the situation that this gentleman here finds himself in. Oh, well, good. But to me, I feel terribly inhibited in that I would have thought from the allegations that this gentleman has made that we could very easily be into something that was sub judice. I mean, if he is suspended and we are discussing it, not that I can help him very much, although some of his statements with regard to local government doing sounded a bit odd, to say the least. You know, I would hate to feel that we could be treading on paths and toes that we shouldn't be treading on. But
well, I can put your mind at rest in that connection because, so far as we're aware, no arrests are impending. So, I mean, we can talk about this. There's no great problem.
I think Brian Woolard's problem is, in relation to that case, sadly there is no sub judice situation because the investigation which he was conducting, he's described 2 investigations, neither of which ever came to court.
But
And they were dead and buried 5 years ago.
He was suspended.
His suspension is not a matter of sub judice. What the Metropolitan Police does to individual officers is not doesn't come in within the purview the courts.
Oh,
No, I'd hate to mislead anyone, but he is in hazard.
he's
If
sorry.
he's suspended, presumably for some disciplinary matter, and I don't know anything about it.
Mm.
To some extent, if some body is going to sit, even a quasi-judicial body is going to sit. And that was all when I was mentioning my difficulty. in
But-
this.
Well, I mean, Brian has
Whatever, he's
exceeded
years,
30 years in the force. His reputation, I mean, certainly whatever he's suspended for, it's nothing to do with his integrity. It is for an infraction of regulations, in the sense that he felt that there was no point in going to a certain meeting because he felt, I think, that Freemasonry would somehow continue to prejudice his career, and therefore he didn't show up. And for not attending at a certain meeting, he has been
Well, it's
suspended.
very few to put words in his mouth. I mean, he hasn't said that.
No. But I mean,
And
it
what
was
I find difficult in Brian's statement, all these sort of, it's got slightly complicated, not having that sort of legal police mind. You are suggesting there's some corruption, and then you look for some reason, you assume, because some people are Freemasons, there is a connection. You haven't convinced me in any way that the Freemasonry link has got anything to do with what you were talking about. You assume somebody was or something else, but I mean, for a police officer presenting a case, it seemed a very sort of thin ice you were on, and you produced no evidence to me that there was a connection between the Masonic or the craft and what you say was happening to you. And this is where I find, I mean, are you prepared to say any more about this, or can't you, or won't you, or don't you know?
Before he does so, because we don't want to go over the same ground twice, I agree with the canon. I first of all think it's rather invidious to discuss, quite apart from the sub judice point, to discuss individual cases in this sort of gathering. And one of the reasons is that you can only make up your mind, if you're going to do it fairly, on evaluating evidence. And you don't evaluate evidence when you only hear part of the story and only one side of it. So that's the first difficulty you have. I mean, we're told he's suspended. No one so far has told us why he's been suspended. We're told that he was taken off a case. Presumably he was given a reason. He hasn't told us the reason at least they gave. And before I was satisfied by anything that the superintendent has said, the chief superintendent.
No, you've promoted me 2 ranks whilst I've been sitting there.
Well, that's
I'm a
good.
lowly chief inspector.
You're chief inspector.
There's
Well,
nothing
before
really
I
about being a chief.
before I formed any view about it, I would want to subject him to a very long cross-examination in private, getting a lot more facts than we've got. And I entirely agree with the canon. He seems to think that because today is Thursday and it's rained, therefore it rains on Thursday. That doesn't follow. I didn't get the impression that there was any clear causal nexus between the masonry and the events. It might be, I wouldn't know, it might be, but certainly I was quite unconvinced. So I would want to know a lot about it. And may I just say this, that I joined Masonry, or heaven knows, 30 years ago. And I was initiated, I went to the first 3 meetings. I gave it up, I've never been since. And to be frank, I gave it up because it bored me. I found it singularly uninteresting. But I've been in practice for well over 50 years. I've seen a lot of corruption. I've heard a lot of allegations. I have never once found anything that was nefarious or Machiavellian in any way connected with Masonry in the whole of that time in this country. I was in the Calvi case, and when I've no doubt we discuss it, as I imagine we might, that's a wholly different ballgame. But it is significant that in a long life mixing with people who are involved in difficulties, I have never once come across a case in which there has been the slightest indication that there was anything malevolent in Masonry. And I think that one of the problems may be, under close investigation, that in some way or another the chief inspector must one day have been bitten by a Freemason.
See, it doesn't follow. I mean, just because there perhaps are some naughty Freemasons, it doesn't mean that Freemasonry is wrong. There are naughty priests. It doesn't mean the Church of England or the Christian Church is wrong. And I think to assume, I mean, one's not going to expect that every Freemason is lily white. But then you haven't said the craft is corrupt. Because, all right, I was a Mason for 10 years and rose to a high office. I resigned for a number of reasons. But this was not because one was smacking corruption. And I find this, I've found in 10 years and levels of Masonry, these suggestions of corruption and manipulation absolute nonsense. I saw no evidence of that either in the provinces or in London. All right, I'm no longer a Freemason, and certain reasons. When I found it was basically Pelagian.
You are still a Freemason. I rather gather the principal is once a Freemason. Also.
Well, I resigned, and for some reason, Grand Lodge keep on sending me a circular. If they want to waste their money, it's their fault, But basically, because it happened, I thought it was Pelagian and heretical, and perhaps, as an Anglican, why are you worried about heresy? General Sin doesn't need to worry about it either. For me, this was wrong, but it was nothing, one wasn't aware of any corruption, and this suggestion that wheeling and dealing goes on, it happens in a golf club or in any dining club just as much, when you get a group of men together with a common interest, and I'm talking about outside lodge, when they have a drink and a meal. Of course they're going to sort of chat about business, but this has nothing to do with masonry. This can happen in any other setting.
May I not ask you this? Are you not falling into the same, in a sense, non-rigorous trap that you're accusing Brian of falling into, in the same way that you're saying he can't draw any links, so why should he assume there is corruption? Is it not fair to say that just because you don't know of any, that it's not fair to assume that there isn't
No, I would
corruption?
I've instances where exactly the opposite has happened, and I'm sure that this is not a Masonic secret. Some time ago, in Great Queen Street's headquarters, they were going to replace these vast boilers in the bottom. Now, when they built Great Queen Street, they forgot to had to take the boilers out, so there was a problem. And the job was up for tender. Now, I was told by a very senior mason who was interviewing the people going for the job that men came in flashing these nasty Masonic rings, And his reaction was, you can take those bloody things off. This tender's going to the best, for the best price. I'm not interested whether you're a Mason or not. Now, this is sort of one instance that certainly one would have suspected that perhaps Great Queen Street might have said, we will keep this job within the Brotherhood. They did not. So one's not sort of talking sort of hearsay. One sat with people in large, at meals, and I've never been aware of anything of this sort of corruption, any more than we'll find in a smart club or a golf club or round a bridge table, whatever it may be. Anywhere where people meet on common ground, they will say, hey, I'm going to do so-and-so next week. A good decorator, or a good builder. But this is not a Masonic thing. This is just when people meet together, or Women's Institute, or Towns Women's Guild, whatever it may be. Or Women Freemasons. Well, they're strange. They're a strange breed.
I am one, so...
Are you Eastern Star or Orient?
No, nothing.
There's a strange name, isn't there?
Yes, but that's mostly in America.
But is it true about Queen Elizabeth I?
I wouldn't know.
Well, there's a marvellous story. Did you have this one? Apparently, that she was the first woman Mason because apparently she sort of broke into swept into a room and she saw, and then they had to sort of initiate her, but so she would keep the secrets. But
no, there is such a story, but 200
it's
years after
Queen
Elizabeth. Yeah. Actually, I know I was invited here. That was supposed to be my secret because I am a lady Freemason, but really my first reaction to our friend's story here is much the same as the three gentlemen who have spoken, that I found the story so unconvincing, and I found it terribly unconvincing from wearing it's very difficult, I wear different hats, from my local government hat, and the chances of a Freemason or two Freemasons doing anything with contracts with the convoluted way that one ever comes to a decision seems to me just absolutely paranoia about the Freemasons, because every committee is made up of different political factions. They go over it in one committee and decide that this should be the limit, and it's passed from one committee to the other committee, who's the client committee, and there's another set of politicians there. And the chances of even one politician getting together with one developer is almost, the chances are 1,000,000 to 1 to get all the convolutions.
It is one interest you don't declare, isn't it, when you're if the contract's up?
In the days possibly when councils were terribly solid, either blue or red, whatever. But these days, especially with this access of information that's going on now, I don't honestly believe that the Masonic influence could really come into it. And I accept the canon said earlier that, all right, you might get a bent Mason, you get bent policeman, you get bent everything, but you can't then go back and blame the organisation.
In view of the amount of concern that people have, and it's no good denying that millions of people at different levels have the feeling, with some justification, I don't want to develop the argument only at this stage. For instance, if you're a council house tenant and you're on the council, you've got to declare your interest. And some of the problems that the superintendent has referred to, if you could look down the list and see who's in the lodges, if there's nothing to hide, why not have it as a declared interest? Because if you're an architect or a lawyer, you're known. You've got letters after your name, and you know that you're a solicitor or a barrister. And so you can see that they have a particular professional interest, not necessarily a commercial interest. Now, I know from my own, I give 2 experiences. And I might tell you that I was told this by an MI5 man who produced to me my own file. I actually saw the file. I won't name the man, although he is now dead, but I know what's in the file and I could go through it.
Dan, can I just interrupt you for 1 second? I'll tell you why I'm interrupting you.
Yes.
Basically because you're about to tell us a fascinating anecdote, which I want to hold you back on slightly because just bear with me a second,
Okay.
because we're into a commercial break, you see, and we're actually, the audience is not seeing this part of the conversation. And what I don't want you to do is to begin that anecdote and for us to come back into it just as we come back on air. So if you just bear with us a second.
Sure.
Sebastian,
That's a
if
very
you
good
want to if you want to give us the count as to when we come back from it, I'll just recap and then, is that all right? I'm terribly sorry to stop the discussion because it's going terribly well. When you've made your point, I think we'd like to very much come back to you, Brian, because Sir David raised 2 very, very important and very direct questions to you, really. The first one, as I understand it, Sir David, being where is the evidence for the connection? The second one being why have you actually been suspended? And I think
what reason did the police give for taking them off the
off
case?
the inquiry, yes, indeed. So after Dan has actually told us the story that he's about to tell us, we'll come back to you in due course.
Yes, I think
What?
I think there are some things that have to be.
They will be. We've only got another 4 hours and 20
You
minutes.
might.
Every time you say 4 hours,
I mean,
I'm
No.
But I think Brian was trying to, I mean, he's being accused of not producing evidence, but one of the problems that Brian has is that if he does, nobody else will have a chance to speak, and he's trying to help us by not delivering it. But I mean, the evidence is, in my opinion, there, although one has to try and
Right, sure.
quintessentialise
We will approach it.
Which you must accept, though.
Yes.
It's perfectly valid to say there ought to be the other half if one.
Yes, if we want to talk generalisations, then there are plenty of generalisations.
We're coming back on air now.
Ought to be made as well.
Since you've actually been away, okay. And that's fine. Now, since you've actually been away, Mr. Smith, T. Dan Smith, was making a point which I think is important that we actually recap. And it was simply that if masonry is some kind of declared interest, why shouldn't this interest actually be stated? Why does it have to be so secret? Why isn't there a public list of members of the different lodges? And you were going to tell us an anecdote.
Yes, I was really following up the point you were making, but I got a call one evening.
While you're doing that, could you also explain, if you've got to declare an interest in masonry, which anybody can apply to join, why don't you include a list of all those who belong to the local Chamber of Commerce?
Because they have no power.
You'll excuse
You
me,
see,
and they have to be invited
but
to join.
They do not take an
looking
oath
at-
of mutual obligation, which is the case.
In commerce, they
don't
need
actually
to.
take an oath of
So,
mutual obligation.
you're not going to
It's
tell
only
me
true
that their
of
liaison
Freemasonry.
isn't as close.
Well, it actually isn't written into the rules. That's all. The only difference I'm
Lots
making.
of women take an oath to honour and obey what they used to anyway. I must say a few of those slip back.
But I think that no one can deny that the powerful Masonic lodges have a lot of power and influence by definition because of the people who are members of them. But what I was going to say, and this is from my own experience, that I was called up one Saturday evening by a gentleman who said, "You don't know me, but you might remember some circumstances." And he outlined the circumstances, and I said to him, "Well, you may be surprised to know that, in fact, I know from someone else that you're an MI5 man." Now, I knew that. He came to see me, And there were two reasons for him coming. One was a personal reason in relation to his son. I won't mention the name because his son is now quite an eminent person. And the other one was to tell me that there was a conspiracy taking place which became the Cruden affair in Newcastle. He named the people, and there were 4 of them who were Masons on both sides of the council, 2 of them who were my colleagues. And he said, if I were you, I would keep away from the debates where Crudens are attending. He told me where the meeting was, when the meeting was, and I checked that out, and sure enough, the people were there. And I never did attend a single meeting when Crudens was discussed, but it didn't stop the affair. And when I confronted my 2 colleagues and said, what are you doing with 2 members of the opposition attacking what I was then the leader of the council, he could produce no answer. Now, I'm not saying that it was because he was a Mason or the others were Masons, but it was a coincidence that they were meeting and they had in common the removal of me by one means or another. Now, the other point was that when I went to prison, I had many people who thought I was a Mason, but of course, obviously the Masons knew that I wasn't a Mason. The 2 that I'm talking about knew that I wasn't a Mason. But I knew the handshake because so many people that didn't know I was a Mason used to give it to me. And so I used to, as best I could, give it back. Now, I did that because I don't like secret societies.
But how does the handshake actually work?
Well, I mean, the way that I got it, one of your colleagues gave it to me when I came in. Whether he was kidding me or not, I don't know. But I mentioned that because the fact of the matter is that happened to me tonight. Now, he may have been kidding me because he knew that I wasn't.
Or did that feel like the right handshake to you, Martin?
No, I think he gave me the second degree handshake.
Yeah.
It depends on which knuckle you get the pressure.
Okay. So
but it was sufficient to indicate, and I could have done. There are 2 handshakes that I was picked up as I understood them, and I was going into a prison when one of the officers gave me the Masonic handshake.
Do officers always shake hands with prisoners when they come in?
Pardon?
Do officers, is this a habit?
Never.
They say, welcome,
Never.
you know.
Never, ever.
I'm just asking the
But
police.
nevertheless, I got that Masonic handshake, and then the chaplain of the particular prison gave me the Masonic handshake, and then I was invited to a meeting in the church in the prison.
the prison chaplain.
By the prison chaplain, and it was a Masonic meeting. Now, there's no way that you can tell me that that didn't take place, because it did take place. And when I got there, you can appreciate I didn't last very long. It was looked upon as a dreadful thing to do. Now, if I can just put this little aside, I had tried to get that same hall to set up a group of Alcoholics Anonymous. Not that I had the problem, but I felt it was a worthwhile prison activity, and I couldn't get the use of the hall for that purpose. Now, I know that the people that they're prisoners and officers, and the chaplain, therefore were Masons. If there was no special significance in the Masonic connection, not only in the council, but between prison officer, chaplain, and prisoners, then it seemed a strange thing to me. Now, that actually happened, and I don't say they were discussing parole, I don't say they were discussing anything of significance, but they had that unity, and they had that ability to meet. Now then, if I can just...
Is it corrupt if they meet for worship
It's
on
not
Sundays?
it's not a question. It's not a question of corruption. It's a question that they could do it.
But yes, but you're suggesting all sorts of ulterior motives.
I'm
Well,
not.
If they were having a lodge, and I've no idea whether lodges meet in prisons or not. Perhaps you know.
No, I know.
Perhaps they meet in Holloway. I don't
I
know.
think I ought
but
to object
I mean,
and say
if
I'm
they
not
were,
here to defend men Masons.
you were, this innuendo, this hint.
Well, no other organisation that I met, and I was in 18 prisons, could have had that meeting. They had that meeting
Why
because
do you say
they...
that? Why do you say that?
Pardon?
Why do you say that?
Why do I
So
say...
what's your evidence for that? Why do you say no other organisation could have been? I mean,
Because there would
that's a
be
very
no
bold
means of
assertion.
communication. No,
because
specialist.
you're going backwards, aren't you?
The curate couldn't have been enough. You couldn't have had a meeting of the RIBA because the curate couldn't have been one. The prison officers couldn't
But
be.
how do you know that? You're
Because
assuming
they
that.
couldn't be.
How do you know it? You don't
Because
know.
the prison officer wouldn't be an architect, else he wouldn't have been a prison officer. The kind of grouping that the Masons had was that they have a means of connecting each other simply by a handshake. So that, but yes, they could go into prison and those men knew that they were Masons. And there's no doubt of that at all. They were going to have a Masonic meeting at which I could have been there.
But
Except
tell
that
me-
I couldn't go. Yeah.
How do you know?
Because I was there.
What
Well,
happened?
what
I was
benefits?
there.
They thought,
If I could have gone
happened in
on
the
with the
meeting?
procedure, which I couldn't.
They thought
I
you
was
were a
actually
Mason,
10
did they?
seconds
They?
left.
Because of the handshake, they thought you were a Mason.
They didn't think I was a Mason. They assumed I was because I was actually in the meeting. I
What
was
benefits
invited
did
to
you
the
get
meeting.
in prison following that?
Pardon?
What other benefits did you get in prison from them following that?
From them, none.
Yes.
I mean, I was
Well, that-
treated in a hostile manner.
if you were going to get
rapidly discovered that you weren't really a Mason.
Within seconds. Because they then got down to the business.
They probably assumed from the nature of your offence, in other words...
Well, Paulson affair was said to be
yes.
a matter for Masons.
Well,
Now,
it-
it's no good arguing the men in that room were Masons, and they were Masons, and they had given the Masonic handshake given to me, and whether I gave it the right way or not, it was sufficient to get me invited there. It was on, you're on the square, Dan, or whatever the parson said to me.
May I ask you a question?
Don't
What's
wave at
what's
me. It's
puzzling
nothing to
me
do with me.
is,
What may have happened in some badly run prison.
You mentioned something about procedure, and at some stage during that procedure they discovered you couldn't follow
I
them.
literally got in the door.
Well, why should they throw you out? How at that stage?
Because you asked me the detail now. The procedure that they began then took you to some other method of identification. And I...
So
Was he quite-
you could do the handshake, but you couldn't get much
That's
further
right.
within
I didn't know anything else at all.
But quite clearly it wasn't a formal Masonic lodge,
No.
because there are no lodges formally consecrated to meet within prisons, but what it might have been is some kind of gathering of Freemasons.
They were asking
and
each other what lodges
and
they were
certainly,
in.
Dan would have been subjected to some
They
further
were
sign of
identifying themselves
recognition.
as to where they were.
I think
But
the question that perhaps the Canon and Sir David are sort of hinting at is that it's all very well, but I mean, what's so terrible about this?
Because you're getting a privilege in prison where there are not many privileges. If whatever you want,
You've
you
given no
That's the
evidence
assumption
of
you're
any
making.
privilege. I mean, you said they met in the chapel, then you said it was the hall, so I don't know which it was you were talking about actually at that moment. But then what privilege did they get?
Well,
I mean,
the only-
I've gone in and conducted group discussions in prison with prisoners and prison officers. I've never refused the use of supercilious for this.
that you would get into prison for a specific service and be authorized to go in, not because you're a Mason or
Exactly.
you weren't a Mason.
Exactly.
It's a privilege in the sense that
But you
if you
didn't-
like
you
the
haven't said-
church, the Catholic Church, the Methodist, they have organizations and you can attend them if you want, but they're known. They don't say, well, if you happen to have a particular handshake, you're in. They say if you believe in God and you're a Methodist, you go to the Methodist Church. That's perfectly
Does
straightforward.
it not occur to you as a possibility, just as a remote possibility, that the reason they weren't prepared to let you run something for Alcoholics Anonymous was because A, you weren't an alcoholic, B, you weren't anonymous, and C, you knew nothing about it?
That's very... I mean, that would be quite right. It could well be that. But if you can give me one good reason why any church in prison would not allow you to use the vestry for the purposes of helping alcoholic people whose main problem was alcoholism that got them into
They may
crime.
well have been prepared to do it. They just didn't think that T. Dan Smith, able as he is in so many other fields, was the best man to be dealing with Alcoholics Anonymous.
They didn't have to, but that didn't stop them letting me deal with a lot of other problems.
Well,
I
that's
set up
exactly
a
what
lot
I'm
of
saying.
associations
That
in
is
prison.
exactly what I'm saying.
Pardon?
That is exactly what I'm saying. You were able to deal with other problems.
Perhaps the meeting was to make aprons out of mailbags. Anyway.
Well, I don't want to pursue that further. What I'm saying is that everyone there was a Mason.
I understand.
And they had the right, just by a handshake, to go from prisoner, prison officer, and meet as one congregation.
Let me draw us back to Brian's case. Brian, Sir David raised 2 or 3 fairly specific questions to you earlier on. They were that you had outlined a doubtless fascinating story, but there was absolutely no evidence in your story to connect the concept of Freemasonry and corruption within the Metropolitan Police. And he asked a couple of very specific questions, like why did the police say that you had to be taken off that inquiry, and why were you subsequently suspended? Can you answer those 3 points that Sir David made?
I came into the inquiry in mid-stage, and at an early stage of the inquiry, or rather the evidence that came out as a result of research, was that the consultant architects who were employed to supervise the contract had, one of them, a senior partner of the company, had in fact accepted a all expenses paid holiday abroad at the moment that the tenders were being considered by a particular contractor who actually secured the contract, and these contractors were the subject of the investigation.
So why were you taken off it, though?
I was taken off it because they said that by going to the Director of Public Prosecution's office and avoiding the chain of command of the company fraud department, I had caused embarrassment. That was the reason I was taken off.
And that was the reason you were given by the police?
Yes.
Should you have done that? Should you have gone in that way, or should you have followed the chain of command?
Well, I suspected, you see, what I wanted to do, I suspected that there might have been some...
Never mind what you suspected. Should you have followed a different course from the one you adopted?
Well, if you let me finish, perhaps I will be able to. I have told you earlier that in 1981 I asked for a transfer from the company fraud department. I felt very strongly that the deputy head of that department put the interests of Freemasonry, particularly in an inquiry which was really a nebulous inquiry, where there were just tape recordings of police officers and allegedly a complainant saying that these police officers had done him all sorts of favours, which he later said was untrue. The senior officer seemed to be very, very concerned about protecting those tape recordings and preventing them from being in any way being introduced into evidence. That concerned me because as a methodical police officer you would automatically submit those tape recordings for authentication, because if they'd been edited they were no earthly use at all, as you would realize, in evidence. My feelings were, because of the manner in which I was pressurized, because I wasn't as long-sighted as he wanted me to be. I didn't finish the inquiry within a week. I was subjected then to very, very close scrutiny. And what also concerned me is that this senior officer had known the suspect in that inquiry for a long, long time. And if you hand an inquiry which you think is a delicate matter to a junior officer, and you have knowledge of the suspect in the inquiry, and have known that suspect, and know his MO and his background, then you should reveal that to the officer. I would never give an inquiry to a junior officer myself where I knew a suspect in the case without fully briefing him with regard to the suspect's character and his background.
Well, I know we're not in court, but do you think you could now answer my question, which was, whatever your motivation, did you in fact break the rules? Did you go by a wrong route?
I told you I did.
Well, that's probably why
the reason why I bypassed the chain of command is because I suspected that the contact between the local authority and the Director of Public Prosecution's office had been through a Masonic channel.
That may be right.
In going then to seek authority to interview an official at the Director of Public Prosecution's office, I just intended to ask him some very simple questions. How did he come to contact me at that particular time? Because it was the timing of the contact so soon after I'd interviewed the senior official and the other one had gone missing. That concerned me. Now, if I had gone to the chain of command of the company fraud department and I had asked, can I please go and interview this official in the Director of Public Prosecution's office? I suspect he may well be a Freemason, and that contact has been made via the back door in this inquiry, and he's making inquiries at the behest of somebody else, which was a possibility in that inquiry. And here am I, a painstaking detective who wants to do his job properly. If this inquiry at the end of the day is going to be presented to the Director of Public Prosecution's office, and I'm expected to believe that this official would be strictly impartial, then I want to know what made him telephone me at that particular time. In seeking authority to go and see him, if I had to go through the chain of command, which I suspected then at a very senior level to be interested in Freemasonry and protecting police officers who are Freemasons, and I sought authority and it was refused, I would not have known whether that authority had been denied me because it was an objective judgment, but a subjective judgment in order to protect the interests of Freemasonry.
So you think that police officers shouldn't have to go through a chain of command?
Certainly not.
You think they shouldn't?
I think police officers should go through a chain of command.
But the unusual you don't have to do it.
No, on the usual circumstances of this particular event, I suspected that the chain of command was protective towards police officers who were Freemasons.
You suspected, but did you know?
How can you know these things? This is
it was still all this. I suspected, therefore I didn't, because if I'd done
I've been a detective for many years, and 22 years, and detectives have a nose when something's wrong, and usually. I think I have been very accurate in my judgments in that respect. You get a feeling about it.
I mean, you couldn't turn up in a court of law and say, yes, I had a nose of this. I mean, you can imagine what the prosecuting counsel make of that.
But I had a right, under the judge's rules, I had a right to ask a question of any person from whom I think that useful information in my inquiry could be obtained. And the useful information I wished to know at that time was whether that senior official of the Director of Public Prosecution's office had approached me because of an approach made to him by the back door.
But you didn't go through the proper chain, therefore you will never know whether your suspicion was right or wrong.
That is irrelevant in a way, because had I gone through the chain of command
Very good defence, if I may say so.
Had I gone through the chain of command and the authority been refused for me to see that official in the Director of Public Prosecution's office, where would I then be?
I think
you would have had a little more evidence.
This conversation the whole evening, because quite honestly, I feel I'm completely superfluous to this conversation. It's not at all.
I'm trying to.
It's nothing against you. Please let me.
I don't know how many of you here are in what capacity. Whether you knew I was going to be on this program.
No.
Now. If you feel in any way inhibited because I'm on this program, I apologise.
No, it's myself that's inhibited, because one, I was asked to come because I'm a lady Freemason, amongst other things. I love it. I'm sorry you found it boring. I've been in the fraternity over 30 years, and I enjoy it. I enjoy the friendship and the many other things that come from meeting with other women of all creeds, all colours, all ages. It's a wonderful organisation, and I understood that I was going to meet other women. One, I was told there was going to be a lady who had been brought up in the Masonic school, and another was a woman doctor who was interested in our charitable work. So I'm quite happy to join in any conversation that will put over my feelings about being a Mason. But I really can't imagine why I was invited here, unless it was that you couldn't find a Mason, a male Mason, who was willing to come and put the Mason's point of view. And I'm certainly not going to do that for any male Masons organisation, because although I know a lot of male Masons, I don't know how they go on. I think the canon's put his finger on the thing so often that it's, you know, to me he's just talking good sense about the whole attitude of the thing. But really, I mean, I love taking part in things, but I do really feel that I'm superfluous to this particular seminar, because I'm not going to defend male Masons. What I know of them, I think they're marvellous. I could talk for hours about the benefits, as I see, of being a woman Freemason, but that won't affect your case. So, you know, as I'd like to get a bed, I feel I might as well go home.
We don't do that, didn't we?
Well,
You're civilising the rest of us.
it's up to John to do what he wants, but I
Well,
mean,
John has
it
been
seems to
manipulating quite well up until now.
it seems to me that this is a 3-hour conversation, and perhaps we should initially deal with Brian's case, and then let's talk about the other aspects. Can I just? I have at least had the privilege of talking to the officer who was at the very pinnacle of the decision making, which resulted in Brian being taken off that case. Now, he happens to be a Freemason. He happens also to be an officer that I knew long before I knew he was a Freemason, and I think he was prepared to be very open with me about Brian's case. Now, the problem confronting
May
Brian...
I ask you before you go on, did he tell you in confidence?
Well, he told me in the sense that it was confidential, is what his name mentioned, but not in the sense of the substance of the decision.
Well, are you sure about that?
I'm absolutely certain of that. Let me simply explain that when Brian approached an officer in the Director of Public Prosecution's office, in doing so, he touched upon an extremely sensitive area of the judicial process, which is that the Metropolitan Police, like all police forces, has to maintain an extremely formal relationship with the body, which after all decides which cases actually go to court. Now, Brian's position was that he wasn't actually seeing this man in a strictly official capacity. He sensed that this man was a suspect. So Brian's duty as a detective operating on a certain case was to interview someone whom he suspected of somehow being involved in a conspiracy which initially related to local government corruption, contracts being handed out, possibly inflated, not being supervised, basically a classic local government bilk, and possibly a Masonic conspiracy. Now that remains open, that remains to be investigated. But so Brian was pursuing a suspect. At the same time, the senior police officer who had to take the decision could see that if Brian went charging into the DPP's office, he might, all communication between the director and the commissioner of the Metropolitan Police could collapse. Now that was ostensibly the reason that Brian was taken off the case. Now, I think here we have a case of, the immovable object and the irresistible force. I mean, Brian was the irresistible force, and the relationship between the DPP and the Metropolitan Commissioner was the immovable object. And as it were, the Metropolitan Commissioner, who was not the officer I'm talking about, but who is the nominal head of the Metropolitan, in that capacity, Brian was removed from the case. So it was a perfectly legitimate reason, official reason, for removing Brian from the case. On the other hand, had Brian not acted in the way that he did, I think Brian took a reasonable guess that if he had gone through the chain of command, then the matter might not have gone any further. But as the canon says, we don't know, because Brian could only take one course. If he took one course and he was thrown off the case, I suspect that had he taken the other course, he would have been thrown off the case. And I'm afraid the problem with Brian's case is that he has hit a large number of Freemasons in a line of command, and to him, quite reasonably, it looks as if it is a conspiracy. But now these men may have perfectly justifiable reasons. They all happen to be based in a certain section of the Metropolitan Police, and the fact they were Freemasons was quite irrelevant. But I'm afraid we probably will never know.
Martin, I'd like to actually draw Eileen in here at this stage, because we have been talking hitherto almost exclusively about the male brotherhood of Freemasons. You, as you told us earlier on, are a female Freemason. Are there any female Freemasons within the Metropolitan Police Force?
I wouldn't know. Probably, but I wouldn't know. I was asked this question by one of your researchers, and I gave, and that's not dodging the issue. Anybody over the age of 21, unless their mother's already a member, can ask somebody to propose them into the fraternity. They go to any one of a number of lodges at which they are asked, the first question always, do you believe in God? Doesn't matter how you worship him, so long as you believe in God. And then at that first interview before a committee, you're asked your age, whether you're married, and what your profession is. And that goes on an application form which might lie in the Grand Secretary's office for some 6 months before you ever get made a Freemason. But from that moment on, from the day that you join, nobody ever really asks you what you are, or what your husband is, or what your finances are, because you're all, during the course of conversations at festive boards, as the canon says, yes, there's a cross relationship between people, but you can have a friend for years and never discover that their husband's a builder until part of the temple falls down and you've got to get something. She says, oh, my husband's a builder, he can fix that up and he can do that for you. So, yes, there may well be policemen, but I wouldn't be, in all honesty, be able to tell you, because I don't know everybody in every lodge.
If I can assist you, there are, because a WPC who served many years in the police force and was retired on medical grounds, she came to me when I was at the Wembley police station, and she thanked me for the help I'd given her because she suffered from very severe migraine. And she said that she was a Freemason and she was disgusted at the way I'd been treated. But it's just
Yeah,
it's the only
well,
instance
I said, yes,
it's the only
probably.
instance that
Yeah,
I
don't
know
think
of.
there can be many,
No.
as I would get to
Tell
know.
You're
us
quite a
something
small,
about the
comparatively small
structures.
compared with the...
Oh, very small
Male lot.
compared.
And in fact,
we
I'm right
don't
in
have...
saying that the gentlemen don't really acknowledge the existence
No,
of ladies.
that's
I mean,
perfectly
there's
correct.
no sort of common lodges or anything like that.
No,
It's-
I wouldn't be
I
long
mean,
if there were.
Male masonry, apart from Mount Athos, is the most chauvinistic thing existing in England,
Yeah.
in the
There
world.
is, in
probably, I
fact,
think.
there is a fact to co-masons, but I think they've only got
I don't think
three.
it's recognised much, is it?
I wouldn't
I
know,
don't
but
think
there,
that-
there
in my
are
day, I
such
don't think Grand
things.
Lodge recognised it.
They
I
don't, but there are
Would
co-masons.
it be proper to just enlarge the ambit of this? Because, you see, we're talking really about a form of loyalty and brotherhood. And we're talking as if this is something peculiar to Freemasons. But in reality, almost all people who have common interests and join together develop this loyalty and brotherhood, or sisterhood, if you like. I don't see that as a bad thing. Doctors do it. You try and find a doctor to give evidence against another one in a negligence case. Police do it. Quite apart from being Freemasons, you attack the police and they close ranks. It may be when you're trying to attack them that you feel very frustrated. But the idea that you stand by your colleague, that you stand by your brother, is not to me fundamentally a wrong thing. And what's going on here is that because of this natural feeling that people within a community have for other members of that community, it's then assumed when you look at that in Masonry that there's something evil about it.
But
I don't think that's right at all.
But you know who doctors are, and you know who policemen are. They wear their uniforms. They're members of they've got the same initials after their name. I think the infuriating, the reason that people feel so helpless, often they may be paranoid, they may be imagining it, but they feel that out there somewhere people are in a secret relationship. Now, one may be the man's landlord, one may be the man from the gas board who's coming to cut off the
That's
gas.
equally true. You know, you don't know whether a man belongs to the round table. You don't know whether the chap is a scout. You don't know whether, if he's a little man, whether he's even a brownie.
That is absolutely correct.
However, none of those organisations, as I said earlier, do have an oath of mutual
The Alps
loyalty.
do.
Well, their loyalty to each other as scouts is far less than the oath they take to serve the entire community.
It's
And
an
I would
oath
say
of
that
loyalty,
that's
isn't it, to do good? It's not an oath of loyalty to do evil. Or
well,
to,
it's
or
an
to, or
oath
to
of
do
loyalty
anything
to
naughty.
each other, which may be good or it may not be good. And I think there are enough cases, and we're in a difficulty with Brian's case because A, it's so involved, and B, for obvious reasons, people don't want to get involved in specifics. But I mean, I've investigated lodges where, I mean, let's look at simply the local government lodges where you have members of all the parties and full-time officers, and you have people who service the council as contractors. Some may be building contractors, some may be the people who put the slot machines in the social clubs, the community clubs, but they're all in there in the same lodge. And frankly, that is a subversion of democracy.
You say, wait a minute, you say you investigated lodges, why?
Because I'm writing a book on
To make
Freemasonry.
money.
If you known how long I took to write the book.
Well,
so
you might be a rather slow writer, but in the end of the day, you're hoping to get it published, so you're doing it for monetary gain.
I presume you're a parson partly because you get paid. There's nothing wrong
No,
with that.
I get paid so I don't have to take secular employment. It's a rather different thing.
But no one can deny that there is a...
But no, there's a let's follow this up. You know, you said, you say you're doing all this in covering a conspiracy, investigating lodges.
Yes.
For what? Basically, to write a book, to sell it. It's part of your job. Or have you got a great mission? Or
No,
have you got some overbearing paranoia about it? You did use the word infuriating and then dropped it rather quickly.
The reason that I used the word infuriating is because I have received hundreds of letters from people who are infuriated. They are the people who are expressing the sense of helplessness. Now, whether I choose, firstly, if I were a person who was writing a book on Freemasonry as a mission, either for or against it, I would suggest that I was the most unsuitable person to write it. So, as Orson Welles once said, it's far better to write for money than for posterity. In my opinion, it is a legitimate subject for investigation. There are several 100,000 people who do belong to this organisation, and it is a matter of great interest to a wider public as to what exactly they do. Now, they may...
It's not difficult. You just got to buy Darkness Visible. It's all there. It's all clearly printed out. But you seem to be trying to sort of not just sort of find out all the secrets, such as they may be.
I'm not the slightest bit interested in the secrets. The secrets have been published for more than 200 years.
Yes, exactly. So what are you trying to do?
Well, when you see the degree of public interest in what nexuses are formed within Masonic lodges, the great spiritual concerns, which I know you're very concerned about. I know a clergyman who's written a book, as have many clergymen, about the religious aspects of Freemasonry. Whether they've written them for money or for eternity, I don't actually know, but I don't see that they've done anything wrong. If they committed a crime against the Church of England by writing a book about the religious aspects of Freemasonry...
Church of England doesn't work what people write now. No, but seriously, you seem to be on a witch hunt.
No, I'm not on a witch hunt.
Or trying to find a witch, or
but
trying to
you're
find
on
a
a witch
broomstick.
defence.
No, I'm not.
You're defending the witches, and he may want to attack them. What's important
All
is
I'm saying,
try to get at the
because
truth of the
I
matter.
am just speaking from 10 years' experience of Freemasonry. Now, I have not, and we've had these veiled innuendos, veiled hints, but Brian has produced one scrap of evidence. You haven't.
No, sorry.
Every time we come to something, we say, oh, we can't say it because, or this was said, or perhaps, and people want to know. Everybody is always mad to know if somebody's got a secret. Frankly, this is, this is the great thing, even back at school, the secret society, and, you shan't play with us because unless you stick a finger right
Well,
up
I know
your nose,
there's a Masonic meeting in a prison.
So why
Sounds
are
like
the
that's a fact.
Masons so secretive?
I don't know. I suppose you look historically, if you look at the traditions of the original craft lodges and this type of thing, which is no more sort of, in a way, no more restricted, perhaps, in certain sort of trade union meetings.
Developed from the practical Masons who guarded
this is it,
Masonic.
and I think probably, because it was rather fun to develop these signs so they knew each other, and then, of course, the trouble is because the basic.
Tell us a little about that background. Just sketch in for us in a few sentences.
I'm not a Masonic historian, but as I understand it, you may be better at this than I am, and it's a long time ago. But from the original craft guilds. And one suspects, looking at
stonemasons who built cathedrals
and all that type of thing. The Masons' lodges grew up. They probably needed, I suspect, thinking about it, trying to sort of remember back when one studied this sort of thing, to protect their craft from outside. What you call them now, pitmen on the lump. Cowboys. One suspects. So this is one of the reasons that they built certain things to protect them from the cowboy, black leg labour. And then, of course, it develops. And one can only look in England, because I don't think we really ought to get involved with masonry abroad, as you mentioned. This is a totally different cup of tea. One doesn't really want to get involved in masonry outside England when one does get involved in political things. And then it developed on those sort of lines. And I think one of the dangers one of the problems is that the secrets were kept and they assumed unreal proportions because the real, basic, original reason was no longer necessary. So the secrets became, assume ridiculous importance nowadays, which is probably one of the reasons that the craft can, maintain itself because of this. Now, I find it very odd, and when I was a Mason and since that, I cannot understand how it commands such allegiance. This is something which now you can probably answer this, or perhaps you won't. But I mean, I can remember occasions when I was in Northampton and the Masonic rooms were opposite the racecourse. You know where that is. And a few years ago, in the deep snow, one saw these elderly Masons trudging through the snow, up to their, whatever they've got at that age, in the snow, then stripping it off, put on their black ties to go into lodge. And I thought, I bet if it's still that deep on Sunday, they won't trek that far to go to their parish church. Now, this is probably a fault of the church rather than the fault of Masonry, but it does command this obsessive loyalty.
And contact. Business deals are discussed.
But no, they're not. This is rubbish.
Oh, they are.
This is absolutely.
If I can give the...
You're talking absolute cobblers.
I'm not.
Talking about
I mean,
Masonry.
I was a businessman as well.
About, yes, I know. Well, we won't make remarks about that at the moment. But I mean, let us.
You're
look
not
at
telling
the,
me
at
that
the
they don't discuss business between
not in
each
lodge
other.
they
Of
don't.
course they do.
Well, not in the
The
ritual.
building industry is riddled with it.
Well, I could traditionally
Suppliers
that's where the
and
name comes from.
painters
But
and
let us look
brickwork.
back, and perhaps you can tell me. And is it the same with Lady Mason? Do you know if somebody isn't at lodge, they really feel they've committed the sort of biggest Masonic sin?
Right, yeah.
But it doesn't apply, and one must say, quite certainly in the Church of England, a lot of the most supportive people happen to be members of lodges as well. And as I go around our diocese, you sort of go to visit a piece, you say, oh yes, he's, that sort of, one notices that, only purely of interest. But certainly there isn't the same loyalty, and I long to analyse, I don't know, you got bored with it, but you must have sort of thought about it, what it is that makes this incredible loyalty, which certainly one doesn't find within the churches, I don't think, within the mainstream churches.
Well,
anyhow.
I find I like it because that loyalty exists across religions. I mean, we have Hindus, Jews and Christians in one lodge. They all worship God, so that's okay.
Yeah, but that's,
by us.
An ecumenical
But
thing.
it's as far as I'm concerned, with the women, it's such a wonderful opportunity for those different religions to meet on equal grounds. We're not supposed to discuss politics or religion. Well, you can't talk within the lodge, but I mean at any other time, really, although you wander off.
I would say it's a very superficial thing, because if you're saying that therefore it is not a religious experience, you're not doing anything ecumenical, you have to be meeting and doing something which is safe to all concerned, but you're not involved in ecumenical exercise.
No,
I suspect that a big part of its
loyalty's
attraction, this was the impression I got. First of all, I think the secrecy part of it, which in any event is not secret anymore, is largely what you've said. I think it's a throwback from childhood, that this desire to be in some sort of organisation that apparently has secrets. I think also that it's something of a mutual admiration society. I think a lot of people join it. Not everyone, but a lot of people, I suspect, join it. Because it is an organisation in which you have to go through rituals, you are praised if you do it well, and people who perhaps lack that in other aspects of their life get a satisfaction out of feeling that they are doing something which is bringing approbation from their fellows. And I think this is a very important part of what I've seen, the very little I've only been 3 times.
Dizzy heights of worship of master.
That's
When
right.
your word is law for that year.
One of the things I
Worship
found
mistress,
quite
I don't
appalling
know.
was that after you'd been to the lodge, you then had a dinner, and then someone would get up and would say that the ceremony had been performed in a far greater way than better way than he'd ever seen before. And I remember on one occasion when I was in this short time I was in it, I had the most delightful experience, because I went to a lodge and someone invited me, and because he invited me I felt I had to go. And afterwards they had a dinner, and some visitor, some very important man, got up and he said that he'd been to many lodges in his time, and he'd seen the ceremony performed this evening, and he'd never seen it done so badly. And the whole place collapsed. And it really was a great moment.
Oh, yes.
Martin Short, you're, as you said before, you're writing the book at the moment about the Freemasons. Tell us something about the structure of the organisation in this country. I mean, I'm thinking of I think they're called the 3 degrees. I mean, keeping it as simple as you can.
Well, I never thought that I'm happy to do it, but I feel...
Get it wrong, you'll be correct.
I was going to say it's rather invidious to have to sit in the role of explaining Freemasonry to the British public, but I'm happy to do it as objectively and without omission and as calm and without any
payment.
personal involvement at all. There are the fundamental structure of English Freemasonry, regular Freemasonry, is the craft. These are the 3 degrees. You start off by becoming an apprentice, and then a fellow craft, and then a master mason. After a number of years of serving in various functions, from being a steward, which is exactly what it sounds like, the man who actually has to pour the drinks, right the way through to junior and senior warden. You may, if you have the stamina and the memory, and you manage to impress your colleagues, and you also need a bit of money, just a few £100 to buy the presents for the ladies' nights, that kind of thing, you could become the worshipful master of your lodge. And then, as one Freemason said to me, he said, it's like dropping off the end of a cliff, because once you've been the master, or you're the immediate past master, there's really nothing much for you to do. You can become the director of ceremonies, or you can become the almoner, or the charity steward, or perhaps you can become the secretary, or the treasurer, or onerous jobs, which... chaplain, yes, of course. Forgot about him. Then perhaps you can go on to a different category of Freemason. You become, or indeed a few years before that, you could have joined the Royal Arch, which is also part of regular Freemasonry, governed from Great Queen Street. That's the structure which everybody sees as the headquarters of British Freemasonry. But beyond that, there are a lot of side degrees. There's a great mistake. Some people call them higher degrees. They're not higher degrees. They're simply other ways you can pursue Freemasonry. You could, for instance, become a Royal Ark mariner. The mythology there, the central legend of ordinary craft Freemasonry, is the building of the Temple of Solomon. And people play different roles in that. Allegedly, the architect of the Temple of Solomon was murdered, and in the 3rd degree, he goes through a kind of resurrection rite, though some Freemasons would jib at the word resurrection. However, in the Ark Mariners, the whole mythology is based around Noah's Ark. Everybody plays the part, different roles.
Animals?
Well, I don't know. They don't go in 2 by 2. Certainly, there aren't male and female. Anyway, and
there's a point. There could be a meeting point.
Yes, with amazing consequences. And then there's the Knights Templars. The Knights Templars ritual emulates the journey which pilgrims used to make in the Middle Ages between Jaffa and Jerusalem. And allegedly, you see, there are all these gangs of infidels, because this is a Christian form of Freemasonry, the Knights Templars. You have to sort of rescue these people before so they can get to Jerusalem and visit the temple. You see, this is so I mean, all these different varieties of Freemasonry, and
side degrees.
And then you've got also the Rose Croix, otherwise known as the Ancient and Accepted Rite, which takes you, or the Scottish Rite, that takes you to the 33rd degree. And again, it's a great myth. People sort of say, he's 33rd degree, he's top Freemason. And I have to say that my predecessor, Stephen Knight, did somehow get a little bit wrong, because he assumed that the 33rd degree was the very highest rank of Freemason. In fact, an ordinary craft Freemason, once he's become a Master Mason, he can look anybody in the eye. He's the level of any other Mason. He can look at the Duke of Kent, and they are on equal terms. That's in theory, you know. So, I mean, I can see it has a tremendous.
And what about in practice?
Well, I mean, I think it's true. I think you could look down the list of names in Grand Lodge, and you would believe that it was a perfect social pyramid. At the top, you have aristocrats. Firstly, you have a royal duke, and after all, he's one of a long line of royal Freemasons. I mean, practically every king of England in the last 200 years, with the exception of George V, who somehow managed to avoid it, but certainly George VI, Edward VII, Edward VIII, the Duke of Windsor, very strong Freemason, extraordinarily ardent Freemason. A number of the princes, the dukes, the royal dukes in the 18th century. It's got a very strong pedigree, and below that you have a whole string of aristocrats who appear on all the prominent lodge lists. They are the accoutrements of of a social structure which is almost a perfect mirror image. And at the bottom, on the craft lodges, people who really are. So this lamp was going to fall down. Might have been some Masonic sign they flashed at me there. I think the ordinary craft mason can be anybody. I mean, he can be an unskilled labourer. I know a lodge of foul-mouthed plumbers in the East End. There are any walk of life, and in a sense, the police are only part of this system. I mean, the police are in it, the lawyers are in it, architects, carpenters, postmen. Somebody once said to me, a mason who was somewhat disillusioned, he actually said it was a mechanism of social control, that he felt it was a way in which society was sort of somehow regulated. You know, we could rely on, you know, so long as the Grand Lodge is there, then somehow society we will never be threatened by revolution in this country, because it's a bastion, represents all that's good and true, and it's clubbable, you see. Italian Freemasonry may be dismissed as conspiratorial, because basically that's what the Italians are like. The same phenomenon in England is described as clubbability, because the British are clubbable people.
All you've just said is so terribly supportive of Freemasonry.
Well,
it really is.
I'm not a man with a mission.
What you have just really said. I mean, I think this is the appeal, and adding to the gentleman here, that this is something that, you know, is out of life. It's absolutely true. It's all based on the original Masons, you know, practical Masons, and it, you know, you can act out this story, and this self-adulation is not all bad. I mean, when you've had the privilege of seeing somebody who joins, who perhaps isn't very erudite, and has extreme difficulty in understanding some of the archaic words that are in the ritual to begin with, and you have to tell them how to say them even, and then, you know, everybody's supportive, and a few years later that person is able, as you say, to become the master of the lodge. And I mean, that woman's standing in the world is so enhanced, her whole attitude to life is changed in a free and friendly way, and it's quite a remarkable.
Can you think of any parallel in any other activity that would engage in that kind of practice and be drawn to it on these wet nights on the road to Northampton? Anything else? Tennis club or football club?
Start with a round table.
Pardon?
Start with a round table.
But the round table at least
I gather
reach out. They have weekly meetings and they have collections in the streets.
But that I gather, correct me if I'm wrong, apart from the fact that and I know nothing about it, so correct me, apart from the fact they do a lot of very good charitable work, they are usually groupings of businessmen.
Yes. But they're public. They're public. I mean,
they're not public, are they? I don't know whether you're a member of the Round Table.
And it doesn't matter. The Round Table can invite guests, and they can meet in the street, and they can put collecting boxes on, and if they wear the uniform of the Rotarian, there's nothing wrong with that. The point I want to make is that the protagonists in the argument, Mason or not Mason, never arrive at any kind of decisive conclusion at all. I'm neither anti-Mason or pro-Mason. I've given two examples myself, which I resent, because if you're in prison, as you know, you have no rights. And I object if Masons in prison therefore have a right, simply because they're Masons. That is a fundamental point. And likewise, on the point you make about loyalty, you say the police have loyalty, they'll not shop each other. But their business is getting the guys they're chasing to shop each other. They want grassing is one of the successful activities of the police. So it's not loyalty as a principle they're interested in, because if it was, they wouldn't have a crime watch or the program. If you've heard anything, would you let us know? Now, I'm not arguing against that. But loyalty or secrecy that combines people together, and particularly in if you like, since I first started work, I've known joiners. I don't agree with the definition of how the craft guilds came up. The craft guilds were the men who were made free. They became the freemen.
Masonry started from craft guilds, which is another different thing.
But you still have the freemen's craft guilds without the Masonic appendages. I mean, I'm all in favour of craft guilds, and I think
look,
it's
you're not
a
saying-
desirable thing that we should
You're
have.
not saying that secrecy of itself is something evil, are you?
I am. I think that any organisation has got to be responsible if it wields power as it wields power, whether it's the Masons or even MI5 or the police. In the end, the democratic institutions of this country have to have a right on behalf of the ordinary person of questioning. Now then, the Masonic organisation is the
I
one...
once represented you.
Pardon?
I once represented you. You wouldn't have wanted me to be in a position to reveal everything you told me. You might be wouldn't
Not
have worried
you, although one of the solicitors that did represent me did that, if I may say
Well,
so.
now that was secrecy. There was nothing wrong with it.
No, but I agree, and it must be that way. But that is, in a sense, you're fighting for the freedom of the individual, your client, rightly or wrongly.
Well, the police would say that they're fighting for the protection of the public.
And there is a procedure laid down which is understandable to the public and to whom the police are responsible, and you are responsible. You're responsible to your professionalist body, and you've got to carry out the rules. And therefore, the public, the ordinary man in the street, at least nominally, has the right to question the procedures and appeal against them.
It's because you
But
can
the
choose
power
to
of
be in the police, you can choose to be a criminal, you know. But this is a very different thing from Masonry, which is a private thing. Why should all things be made public just because you don't know about it? You see, and you seemed to, a little while ago, equating secrecy like with loyalty. Now, what is wrong? You equated, perhaps you were sort of talking quickly, secrecy and loyalty were put together in one sentence a little while ago, which I found rather surprising. Perhaps you didn't mean to say it.
No, I mean it. I mean it. If the
You mean
great
secrecy-
argument
you
today
mean
about
secrecy-
secrecy,
No,
the MI5 secrecy, we can't discuss it because it's secret, presumes that the person that says it's secrecy has some rules that govern them. The Masonic lodges, or the people who operate the Secrecy Acts today, in my view, are pretending under the legitimate guise of state secret to carry out actions that have nothing to do with secrecy, and likewise the Masonic lodges that do wield this power.
What power?
The power that they've got of meeting together, you're the paint supplier, I'm the paint user.
Rubbish.
But
look,
not rubbish.
keep
It
on,
is, you
stop,
can say
keep
rubbish,
on.
but
Todd, you've
dozens
said
and
this
dozens
time
of the
and time
viewers
again.
that are listening to us tonight know that it happens.
Give me one
you
evidence.
can close
Give me
your
one,
eyes to
give
it,
me
but
one
it's
bit
a
of
fact.
evidence. Give me one case.
I could give you, in my lifetime as a major painting contractor, I could give you 1,000 bits of evidence. But what's the
Are
point
you
of
saying that
talking about that tonight?
are you perhaps saying you didn't get a job because you weren't a Mason?
I'm not. You see, that's where you push the line of the
well, no, let's follow it round, because you were saying one thing, I just twisted
I'm
the other way
saying that's
round.
what people join the Masons for. Maybe they
Rubbish.
shouldn't do.
They're not
But it's
supposed
not
to.
rubbish.
They're
They
not supposed
join it and they say,
But why
join it
blame-
because you get influence
At the
and
very
you know
beginning,
people
one
in there.
said there may be some corrupt Masons, let's not blame Masonry for it.
I'm
Now,
not
we've
saying
all
they're
agreed
corrupt
that.
even. It's just a good way of wheeler dealing in business across the board.
But isn't that corrupt?
No. I'm
I
not
mean,
in my view.
wheeler dealing is not what I call open British business dealing, is it?
Well, then everything's corrupt if you define it like that. I mean, it's
That's
like the argument
theologically
about
rather-
insider.
That's theologically rather sad, Dan, actually.
Pardon?
I mean, it's a rather sad theological statement. You're talking about total corruption, total depravity.
You're talking about
No,
it
you
being corrupt.
said,
I'm
you
saying
said,
it's not
you
corrupt.
just said everything is corrupt then.
I said, if your definition of corruption is corrupt, it is. Insiders, doctors, as you say, talk to doctors, and they're loyal, and you'll not get a doctor condemning another doctor.
That's not corrupt.
Of course it isn't.
But you
Even
see-
if the doctor is protecting a doctor who's done something wrong, that's not corrupt. Or a policeman protecting a policeman, that's not corrupt. The loyalty is more important than the principle? No way. No way.
I
The
think
principle is the important thing, not the loyalty.
I think you're probably right. Let me come on your side for a moment. I think you're probably right that as between Masons, I think there is a certain amount of work that passes from one to the other. But again, you see, you make, if I may say so, rash assumptions. I'm not by any means convinced that that isn't because they're Masons, they've got to know one another.
Exactly.
And the question is,
I agree.
and the question is, would someone give to another man who, because he was a Mason,
work in connection with his business if he thought the mason was going to do it badly or make a loss for him?
No.
No. So it's merely a
I would
question of
imagine not.
association. It's a
But it is a link. You see,
Yes,
all
it is a
I'm
link, but
saying
it's not
is
necessarily
that
bad.
having observed from the various positions I've been in, and for the last 15 years a very difficult minority, being in the most difficult minority of all of the ex-offenders, what I have observed through those 15 years, I could name very eminent Masons. Lord Glenamara, who was the victim of the Swiss bank account fake. Being a Mason didn't stop him being the victim of that plot, whoever hatched it. Here in the trial in Wandsworth, Sidney Spall, who went to prison, was a Mason. I was acquitted. I mean, he was found guilty of being corrupted by me, and I was found not guilty of corrupting him. Now, there was something wrong there. It wasn't the Mason business because he was the Mason and I wasn't. But that didn't make that verdict correct. There was a rabbit hole.
As I was in that case, I'm going to be secretive and not say anything about it. I hope
No, but you agree that to get two people there and to reach a verdict, one was innocent of not...
That was an odd piece of law, and the reason for
Well,
it
I
was
hope you're
because
right. I
it
thought it was
because
more than that.
It was because it... No. Now, if you're saying that, then I will speak about it. If you're saying there was anything sinister in it, that's certainly not so. It's a very curious situation that can happen in the law courts. In order to convict someone of a crime, you have to prove it beyond reasonable doubt. And in one case, you may have the proof which satisfies a jury beyond reasonable doubt. And in respect of another man's case, it may be because he's innocent, or it may be because there isn't enough evidence to prove it beyond reasonable doubt, so that one man may be convicted and another man could be acquitted. And it merely means, or can mean, that it was only a lack of evidence in the one case. In your case, happily, it was because you were innocent. But that's neither here nor there. The question is, there wasn't enough evidence.
But how can a man be found guilty of being corrupted by me if I'm not guilty of corrupting
Because the
him?
jury was satisfied...
That must take a
because-
good argument.
No,
Let's have
because
it.
the jury must have been satisfied that there was a sufficiency of evidence against that person, but they were certain, and on the other case, they either thought that he wasn't guilty, or, I'm given saying that for the benefit of the doubt, or that there wasn't sufficient evidence of it.
But you destroyed your own theory about everybody being on the side of the Masons because you got off
But
and the
that's not
Masons
my
got
theory.
convicted.
That's the Masonic argument, that it is my theory. I'm not saying that. I can give you many examples. Many of Paulson's Masonic colleagues that weren't prosecuted weren't offset by many of Paulson's colleagues who were prosecuted. There were Masons and non-Masons prosecuted. I'm not arguing that the Masonic people every time happen to get the right deal. What I'm saying is there is a very, very strong suspicion in all levels. I talked to many policemen out the London Pawn Squad who I met in prison. So I've got a fair bit of information given under, if you like, very favourable circumstances of a 24-hour-a-day session for a while. And we know...
Was it confidential? Was it a secret?
Of course.
Are you
I
bound?
would- and
Are you bound by criminal?
I'm not
criminal
bound by
privilege?
anything other than the fact that I wouldn't betray that information any more than I would betray any other information if it would do no good and it was purposeless. But nevertheless, I learned sufficient about the fraud business, fraud squad, and many other things in prison. Now, all I'm saying is that even in prison, and among policemen and lawyers, I mean, there were one or two good lawyers
sure
in
there were.
prison. Indeed, I might reveal to you that
Bad defence lawyers, probably.
I might reveal to you that one of the lawyers and myself signed Dirty Den under contract while we were in prison, although you can't, I gather, sign a contract in prison that is legal. But that's just a little aside. But there were lawyers in prison involved in fraud cases who also revealed a lot. Now, what I say is there is a loyalty there. I have a loyalty to men that told me things in prison. But some of them were Masons and some of them weren't. And some of them felt that they were in there because they weren't Masons. And the other Masons who were in there said, oh, and I accept the fact, I don't argue, that the Masons are necessarily always privileged. What I say is that as a hierarchy, it would seem to me, in a 15-year experience, there is a hierarchical decision, and some are spared without a doubt. And one of the judges in the Polson affair said in a few words, "I have the suspicion that you are the tiny people in this affair." And I don't think he was far wrong, that there were many powerful people who were Masons that did escape prosecution. There were some Masons, including Polson, who was prosecuted. Now, what does it prove? All that I want to argue is that there is a deeply rooted, widely accepted opinion that many people join the Masons, and I believe this to be true, and I know, I repeat, in my business experience, who join it not for the things that you have laid out, which seem to me at least harmless, whatever else, but they join it for a specific purpose to make contacts, either for their particular profession or their business. Now, it's no good denying that.
I think that is probably true.
Yeah.
I would agree with you.
Yes.
I believe there is a number, probably a significant number,
Yes.
of people who go into Masonry for that purpose alone.
right.
But that doesn't condemn Masonry. That condemns the people that go into it.
But
And
then,
I can remember meeting a number of people who joined for that reason and found out how wrong they were.
Yes.
yes, I mean, I know
a number
that
of people who said the same. You know, I joined it, you know, or one partner joined because one went into Masonry, one went into Rotary. Thought they were sort of, you know, it was a waste of their energy to hunt in pairs. And one of the Masons said, you know, how wrong we were because they said, like, hey, you haven't got one job. I said, well, he may have been in the wrong lodge, of course, which is something which people
But
don't
you admit
necessarily
it's
know.
discussed.
Pardon?
It's part of the business. It was discussed. I mean, you've raised the point
Well,
there.
yes, he admitted that in fact he wasn't. You know, from that point of view, it hadn't been.
He'd gone to the wrong
He'd
lodge.
gone. No, or perhaps he'd gone in with the opinion, and you said that many people outside there believe. Now, whatever people outside there believe, I mean, it won't alter the truth. And I think it's a rather dangerous political statement. It's one of these sort of weaknesses nowadays, because if a lot of people believe something or think it is so, therefore it must be.
Must be so.
And this is absolute nonsense. This is one of the things that sort of...
But I'm not one of those people.
Well, you quoted those people, those unnamed numbers outside,
No, I mean,
who
I
think
know,
the same
I
as
know
you.
hundreds
Therefore,
of them. I know
Therefore.
hundreds of them that believe
yes,
that.
yes, but
Your
it doesn't.
correspondence
But
will
it does
prove
not
that.
make it true
Of course it
because
doesn't.
people believe it.
Of
Nor
course
does
it
support
doesn't,
your
but
case,
the fact
does
that it happens makes it true. My meeting in that prison place was true. It wasn't a fiction, it wasn't
It
imagination.
doesn't condemn the whole thing, surely, because there are some bad eggs in any organisation. You're not suggesting the royal princes go in to get business, are you? You're not suggesting the royal princes go into Masonry to get business?
I would doubt the cells aren't big enough.
As an administrator, most of my problems have been about things that ain't so. Misinformation, rumour, people getting upset. And really most of the time, it wasn't so at all. And you ask anyone who's really run anything to do with lots and lots of staff, most of the things that you find most difficult to handle are just not true.
And what do you do when you find that something is not true? Do you perhaps, for example, try and encourage less secrecy about it? Do you try and encourage more openness about it?
Yeah.
What do you do?
Well, I'm afraid in an organisation like ours where there's, over 20,000 chaps, and quite a lot of them
In the Metropolitan Police?
in the police, they've got nothing else to do but walk around and wait for things to happen. I mean, they've invented personal radios to spoil my argument a bit, but and of course the workload's gone up. But it is a discipline which absolutely thrives on rumour. And if you give the average policeman 10 solutions to a problem, I know which one he's going to do, the one that shows the worst possible view of human nature. And that's in the nature of things. And so what you really do is, in modern times, you have to invent false newspapers. You have to try as hard as you can to push over the true story and try and get that out before the other one's been invented.
That sounds
It's
to me
a
like
major
communication.
It is,
Yes.
indeed.
Well,
the reason you have to communicate is if you don't, you will then be solving another problem about something that just isn't so.
Isn't part of the problem, though, that communication requires information? And part of the problem with respect to Masonry is that so much of the information is not available. Is that not part of the problem?
And so everything is so that the gap is filled, and without talking about particular cases.
I think just because the members of Grand Lodge for perhaps very good reason, declined to come on this programme, you know, and there's nothing sinister about that. You know, I take you same as on the police. It was a very nice sort of sinister introduction you gave. But, I mean, just because they didn't come, it doesn't mean that they're unwilling to communicate. I mean, Masonry, I don't know, it's become more and more open.
What
I mean,
does it mean?
pardon?
What does it mean?
Well, they appeared on a programme in Manchester because one of our members in Manchester went, and I said to her, well, you better tell the producer that the men Masons may not want to appear on a programme with a woman Mason. You better just sort of tip them off. And they said no, they were quite happy, and I think there were 3 male Masons and the 1 lady Mason, and they were quite happy too.
See,
and that was the time when this book first came
you are
out.
a press and reporter, and one of the problems is when, you know, they ring up and want to take, you say no comment. You automatically assume, the press do very much, that if you say no comment, you're hiding something. And they go on and on and on. And this is one of the dangers, and I think this one can well respect people saying, you know, no comment. I mean, I'm not at all, we had a sort of case in the Diocese today where we have not made a comment, because, and it's very difficult to do that, because you have this obsession or conceit that you have the right to tell people what you think they want to know. And, you know, all the press, and certainly the gutter press is the worst about this, you know, we know what you feel, and they said no comment, therefore what are they hiding? And we will find out, and then you destroy somebody.
Yes,
I mean, the classic cases, I mean, recently in the press, about priests who have been destroyed by the gutter press, thinking people have a right to know. And I think we've got, there's a balance between this openness, which Dan was talking about, and respecting people's right not to make a comment. And if the Grand Lodge decide they don't want to enter into public debate, they don't want to sit up all night chatting away, you know, as some of us are doing, why then assume that they're hiding something that they're guilty? I mean, I think this is the danger. We have, surely one of the rights in law, I'm probably wrong, is, you know, to remain silent. Certainly as a priest I'm entitled to. You know,
some of the most notable defendants have
yes.
taken that right to remain silent.
And there is a danger that you take that away by saying that we have this obsession of poking our noses into people's beds, into, you know, to every little part of their private lives. And if they say, no, I'm not going to let you, what are you hiding? You know, what have you got in your closet?
I'm very interested by this thought on your part, because it seems to me that you seem to be taking the position as, in very broad general terms, I don't want to overplay this point, but in broad general terms, as a defender of Freemasonry. And yet you, interestingly enough, went to very great lengths to actually resign from the Freemasons. Can you tell us why?
Great lengths. It took me, I had to write a lot of letters.
That's what I meant.
Because when you get to certain, you know, when you, and I think one of the things is, as a priest in Freemason, you tend to get a meteoric rise to fame because there aren't many of us. I mean, this is nothing to do with me.
Not like it used to be.
No. And so one got provincial rank very quickly, became a provincial chaplain, so you became a consecrating officer of lodges, so you collected honorary membership, because if you're a consecrating officer of the same, the ladies of the lodge, you're then made an honorary member. So one collected honorary membership. I was a founder member of a lodge, I was in a London lodge, and, you know, I got London Grand Rank. Therefore, when I decided to resign, it was just a sort of boring scribing. And I don't think it was an easy thing to do. It wasn't easy because of the bonding, which we were talking about before, and one felt one was being disloyal, and then one had to make the decision, is this right for me as a priest? And I felt at the end that I couldn't reconcile, and this had been growing over the years, I couldn't reconcile my role as a priest in the Church of God with being a Freemason. Now so Freemason at that time was wrong for me. And I think I could make a case that it's probably wrong for any priest. I wouldn't necessarily agree with the statement of General Synod last November. It was a very sort of stupid, and one of the General Synods sort of, you know, getting above itself, lashing around for something to say. Influenced, unfortunately, by what Dan Smith's thing, you know, they were swept along by so many people outside feel this, therefore, and sort of forgetting the very wise remark of the Bishop of London last year that a majority vote cannot alter the truth. But for me, it was wrong. I resigned, but I did not receive any unpleasantness. I had one or two very moving letters of how sorry people were.
What was the problem, as far as you could see it, though?
My problem?
Yes.
Personally, I found, and I did say a little while ago that early on that I felt it was Pelagian.
Perhaps something for
explain
everyone.
that?
No. Well, let us say we were talking about, Dan was talking about the sort of, you take a step of yourself, and to justify yourself. And one of the things in Masonry is that by your actions, by your actual behaviour, this is the way to salvation, this is the way to the Grand Lodge above. And probably because, as we've heard, it sort of leaves out, or pretends to, and I wouldn't agree with this actually, it sort of leaves out the religious side, and I wouldn't agree with the statement about this. One felt it is very much the suggestion that you are saved by being a good boy, by being a brownie or whatever it, no, boys can't be brownies, by being, by being a Cub Scout or whatever it may be. And then the other thing I felt,
I'm
and
sorry,
this is slightly more...
let me just be clear on this. And by contrast, the Church of England teaches what?
Well, if you're going to be theological, you talk about cooperating prevenient grace. In other words, God puts the idea into your mind, the grace into your mind, and gives you the grace to carry it out. Now, this was sort of St. Augustine's line, which Pelagius, attacked and was, listed a heretic for that. Now, that is one side which is perhaps peculiarly priestly, because the Roman Catholics are always accusing the Church of England being Pelagian anyhow, and it tends to be, I think, certainly cosy middle-of-the-road Anglicanism, I think perhaps is, because I'm happily not part of that. On the other side, and I'm only prepared to go so far on this one, and there's no secret, when you took your obligation, you sealed it with a kiss on the volume of the Sacred Law. Now, I would...
The Bible.
The Bible, it's called the volume of the Sacred Law, the Bible, which is there in open at every lodge, and I'm not revealing any secrets at all on this one. I felt that if you took an obligation on the Bible, then you should be prepared to accept, as far as you can in your own personal life, the laws and rules contained in that Bible. In other words, let's face it, one would expect Masons to strive to live by the Ten Commandments. One would expect Masons to be reprimanded if they did not. Now, in my experience, this was not necessarily apparent, and I found that, and there's a very good Masonic suggestion that if you are at variance with a Mason, you do not go to lodge with him until your differences have been settled. I can't remember the ritual now, but that's a fair précis, isn't it, to what is happening. When you get to a certain position, as I was, of Grand Rank, Grand Lodge, you cannot absent yourself from lodges on this.
There was a brother with whom you were at variance.
And I found this was a very personal thing, that I was not prepared to give due reverence, the grand or royal salute, to people with whom I felt were deliberately not supporting what by implication I think they had accepted by kissing the volume of the Sacred Law. Now, this may be sort of me being a little extreme, perhaps a little, but this was my personal thing about it.
I think we need an example to understand your position.
Yes, I think I'm speaking as a Christian priest now, all right? I would find it very difficult to... I do not approve of second marriages in church. Therefore, I would find this was a breaking of God's law. I think the seventh commandment is something that people should try not to break, not to boast about breaking the seventh commandment. Hands up who knows what it is?
Very interesting.
Tell us. Thou shalt not commit adultery.
That's not, thou shalt commit adultery. I'm just sort of checking the sort of Christian background of the people present. And therefore, if somebody deliberately is breaking this law and is in a Masonic lodge, and I feel this is against, I would see, certain of his obligations, which certainly entail respect in the terms of his brother, his sister, his wife, and one would, as a Christian, one would extend that outside the Masonic parameters. And so, to me, this was something which I, over the years, began to realise that it wasn't right for me, and it was very difficult for me to sort of be preaching one thing on a Sunday, having been apparently, by my presence, condoning something on a Saturday night when I was at lodge. Now, but this is a very, very personal thing to me, and I would not want to say this is right for other people. This is my personal reason for that.
I understand that very well, and I think also that the point you're making is that adultery may well be a major crime within your thinking.
I know,
theological
sin.
point. A
sin.
sin.
There's all the difference between sin and crime.
But,
Unfortunately, sin and crime are not the same things nowadays. They used to be in the good old days.
Let me ask then, if you ever had any fears or concerns of that theological nature based on something more than just sin, based on conceivably crime?
No.
Never at all?
No. I know that I'm only speaking from my own experience in Freemasonry in the province of Northamptonshire and Huntingdonshire, I think, and in London. Now, and you can only speak from one's own experience and from, I would say, sort of honest and upright people in that sort of thing. And I've never been aware of, now it may be that I'm sort of innocent, but as I'm, deal with a lot of the church business, I'm not innocent in business ways. And I was never aware, and I'd never been aware of that. It may be that Northampton is different. I think there are more powerful places in Northampton where business deals are done than in the Masonic headquarters, in fact. And you can go to certain places for lunch, you can see a lot's happening there. Occasionally you can in most places, who's having lunch with whom. You think, I don't know what they're discussing, You know who's paying for that champagne.
Martin Short, the canon has outlined for us an area of concern based on theology. Have you come across any other areas of concern based on the concept of worship and theology and so on, as it relates to Freemasonry?
Well, I think if you read all the various church reports, Methodist, Free Church of Scotland, Church of England, Catholic, there are numerous heresies which are alleged against Freemasonry. Grand Lodge, who cannot be here tonight, would refute all of these heresies. They would also, by the way, point to the fact that when a Mason enters the first degree, he takes an oath that he is not motivated by any mercenary motive whatsoever, that he goes in penniless, in theory, he goes in without any coin, but also that he has no ulterior pecuniary motive whatsoever. Now that is in the ritual. And if Grand Lodge were here, they would say that therefore, although there may be a few Masons who don't abide by that, that is what we stand for. They would equally say that while it is for the advancement of religion, it is not a religion, and equally it doesn't conflict with religions. Now this opens up all manner of, it's a can of worms, because
what is a religious service and what isn't.
Yes. I mean, for a start, I think that is a heresy. Certain people in the Church of England and the Catholic Church would regard the gathering together of people of different religions under one Godhead is itself a particular heresy, the name of which escapes me at the moment. There is, as the canon says, the Pelagian heresy, which is basically that the road to salvation is not through
faith. Can we move these? I'm getting bored with these. I'm sorry. I'm sure you borrowed them at vast expense from somewhere. So
no, I don't think it was vast
expense. Move the apron from the Royal Archmasonry.
That's all obviously got,
yes.
Costs a lot of money.
I've never seen a smart one
to do with the apron anyway, can I tell you? Absolutely nothing to do with the apron.
Yes. I know you were hiding your crib sheet under it, but
no, on the contrary.
There are numerous. I mean, the Pelagian heresy is faith. To the Christian believes that belief in God is what gets you salvation. It is alleged that Freemasonry is preoccupied with good works, notably charity, and that charity, which is a major feature of Masonic work, is stressed at the emphasis at the cost of your own sort of faith in God. But as Freemasonry formally says that it's not a religion, then presumably none of this would apply anyway.
I assume that Freemasonry, I don't know enough about it, but I assume that it abhors criminality. Yes. I seem to recall, I think it was Seddon, who was the murderer, who, when he came to be sentenced, used some reference to the great architect of the universe and indicated to the judge, therefore, that he was a Freemason, which, is, if I recall reading, caused a great deal of emotional upset in the judge. But it didn't stop him sentencing him to death, and Seddon was hanged.
Well, some cynics say that he should have given the signal before the jury came in with a verdict.
He left it a bit late.
It was crazy to do it then.
But there's this religious thing, you see, you know that's
I find it very strange that in Masonry there's a tremendous cult of the temple, which is quite incredible. That when I was very sort of new, I was a visitor to Ladies' Night, and after the dinner or festival, we went up in the temple for some people to sing. So I went, And you don't do that. You know, I started a round of applause. Now, one would do this in church quite happily, but there is this, I found a sort of unhealthy obsession with the temple building. And to go through ceremonies where you consecrate a temple, which is using very much the form which you to consecrate a church, strikes me, if you're not having a religious ceremony, why are you bothering to consecrate? Now, you may correct me on this, but to use corn, wine, oil, salt. Which is straight from the Old Testament, which is very much the similar things that's used when you're consecrating a church. Strikes me, if you're not having a religious ceremony, why this cult of the temple? Now, I know it's all that going back to King Solomon and all that sort of thing, but you know, at the end of it, you had the patriarchal benediction, all these things, which smacked to me, and as probably as being the chaplain who was involved in this, one was rather conscious of this. I mean, the whole thing going around with incense and all that sort of thing, but that is what fascinates me, I must admit, is the use of incense, because Masons on the whole tend not to be sort of high church, certainly not Catholic. They're quite happy to fling incense around in their lodges. If you went to one of their sort of low churches and flung incense around, all hell would be let loose. And it's fascinating, they will accept, you know, incense on one level. Well, but you know, it's fun. I mean, that's just a jokey thing, but that always amuses me.
I mean, that raises an interesting point historically about Freemasonry, that the rise of Freemasonry, basically from some mystical time in the middle of the 17th century, coincides with the, if you like, the purification of the Church of England. First, the expulsion of the papacy, or the you know, where the King Henry VIII became Defender of the Faith in 1543 or something thereabouts. But then we rise, then coming through the puritanical phase, through the Cromwellian period, and then you lose the ritual, you lose the incense, you lose the magnificent furnishings of the Catholic faith. So you're left with a rather stark form of worship, and coincidentally, there's this thing called Freemasonry that's on there. Oh, let's join Freemasonry. And it's particularly true in Scotland, which after all has the starkest of all religious... and where Freemasonry, incidentally, is very strong, rather proletarian, and really... not for me, but it's really rather jolly, and they're much more open about it in Scotland.
Open, but I suspect rather more political. My connection with Scottish Masonry, I have a feeling, I had a slight feeling I could have been in Northern Ireland once or twice. Now, in that there was this very anti-Catholic, anti-Roman Catholic attitude, and one doesn't find this in England, but certainly I felt in Scotland, in certain, and certainly in one or two lodges in Corbyn, is like a little bit of Scotland, is even more Scottish. One had this, I had that slight uneasiness. It was a bit political then, and certainly
but isn't that
prejudicial.
Because that's Scotland per se?
Oh, I think so. And you know, because the whole cult of Burns and all that sort of thing.
Because Scotland told me if your name's something, you know, they know you're a Catholic, and if it's...
Oh, I mean, you don't go into... I mean, you listen, you know, if you're a Freemason in Scotland, you don't drink in a green pub that's painted green, I don't think. You probably go to the red, white, blue one, you know. And that is a dip, but this is not the same in England, I don't think.
One was to extend this into the police service through Freemasonry. Would that not lead to unfair treatment if those attitudes prevail?
Well, we're talking about, I was talking about in Scotland, which is different from England, and I don't know.
Yes, I'm quoting an example, if you like, because you've given it to me, of attitude being embellished, if you like, within...
No, I think I would say the attitude is that if somebody is Roman Catholic or supports Celtic football club, you know,
I got letters.
They would not be welcome in a lodge. Now, this is not the same thing. They said, I'm sure if somebody was a real Celtic supporter, was it Celtic? Celtic. You know, they would have a job to get into a lodge in Scotland because you have to be a loyal Rangers supporter. You know, literally, and I think this is, you know, talking a bit extreme, but but I think this is only within the Masonic thing. I don't think it would branch beyond that. But they wouldn't want somebody who was, you know, a paddy. Just in lodge.
Let me ask Martin a very direct question, if I may. I mean, what, drawing on from what the canon was saying just there, is there any evidence in your mind that that Masons at perhaps a fairly elevated level practice in any sense, shape or form magic?
Well, I think that historically Freemasonry was formed in a kind of a cauldron. I'm not saying it was a witch's cauldron, but the 17th century had a number of turbulent elements in it. In the 18th century, there were more turbulent elements. Let me briefly go through those. There was the religious turmoil of the period, which therefore encouraged the development of an organisation in which Catholics and Protestants could gather together, and different denominations of Protestants could all be gathered together in one group of one social group, not to discuss religion, but at least to make friends with people of the other persuasions. So that was one thing. Another is the development of science. Ironically, for something which is mystical in many elements, it was born out of a search for scientific knowledge. Now, science in the 17th century was also alchemy. Alchemy, which is also, partially at least, magic. There was an occult element which was fed into a quasi-scientific organisation, which was then encased in a kind of religious framework.
And one sees strands of that.
You can see strands of it in craft masonry. You can see strands of this. I mean, let's face it. There's evidence of that type of occult going back into the Old Testament with the sun and the moon and the dating, and one sees certain reference to that in craft masonry.
But only that far.
That far. But if you go into some of the side degrees, even strands which you didn't mention, one can see undertones, not overtones, of some of the sort of mystery magic religion that sort of proliferated around in the Mediterranean in the early centuries, and one can see strains of that in some of those, because I think I have a suspicion that some of the side degrees, like the Embroider Select Masters, which is very peculiar. Those are the cryptic degrees.
The Soc Ros Society.
Which is very sort of, which is very Egyptian, which is very, very Egyptian. No, the Royal Select Masters is, and this is becomes a very at that level. I mean, I think there's a certain innocence about craft masonry. And I say the other thing I felt, and I think since you talk of darkness into light, one felt one was, one of the things you're looking for light. Now, as a Christian priest, one felt that round the corner is going to be the Christian revelation. And of course this doesn't happen quite at that point. And I know there are certain side degrees which are Christian, and I refused to join those, because at that point I didn't want to leave masonry, and I strongly suspected if I went into Rose Croix, I would, my Anglo-Catholic bristles would rise very quickly and I would have been out. So I deliberately didn't get involved in those. But there is, looking at it, but you can see it in Judaism, you can see evidence, it's certainly early Christian writings. There is this...
well, the Kabbalah is a strong element.
Yes.
I mean, Masonic historians, and they're a very erudite lot. I mean, I've had to read an extremely large amount of stuff just to get to a certain nugget of information. Maybe I was mining for something particular, but Masonic historians are absolutely fascinated by the occult element in Freemasonry. Now, maybe they regard it as fringe Freemasonry, and maybe they regard it as sort of rather dotty, but it's rather fun to investigate. And I mean, one of the first recorded Freemason in this country is Elias Ashmole, who was the founder of the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, which is obviously some kind of scientific basis. But he was an alchemist, and they also believed heavily wrapped up in astrology, numbers that basically, I don't know much about the Kabbalah, but it's a mystical science, apparently originally developed by European Jews in about the 13th, 14th century, and it's the study of numbers, and I mean, all these things are sort of thrown in, and I think that Masonic ritual is there are all these sort of archaeological traces or geological traces, and you wonder where that phrase has come, and you find there's a whole book about this particular phrase, and it's absolutely mind-boggling. But it obviously gives people a lot of fun. I mean, you can have endless fun looking into the meaning of the ritual.
Endless fun picking out the odd bits that are straight from the Book of Common Prayer of 1662, really. And that's why sometimes Anglican do it quite well, because some bits you think, have I got to learn another boring? Because I mean, it is a great sweat learning all this ritual. You can't read it. You learn page after page. And you didn't have to learn very much as you came. But really, when you get pages of it, and one thinks, thank God I know that bit, because that's straight out of the Collect to something. There's quite a bit is lifted, surprisingly enough. Now, whether this was when they did the Rite of the Witch in 1820, was it about then or something? The modern split, the ritual we used, 18, and whether that was the time when bits, but they're quite chunks.
Well, they weeded out the Christian elements in the 18th century.
You said some little while ago that you couldn't accept what I had said about this meeting of religions, and almost immediately you gave two quotes, both from the Old Testament.
Oh yes.
And that is why the two religions
what I said was that I don't think religious meeting in a Masonic lodge is an ecumenical exercise.
Oh, no, it is not. No, sorry,
No,
I misunderstood.
that was my
what-
point.
I'm sorry, I
No,
misunderstood.
that's what I meant by that. I don't think it's a great
I think lots of
reconciling.
Christians would be sort of slightly disconcerted or surprised to hear how Christian teaching sort of fits in with the business of, for example, tearing out tongues if you know, you tell on another Mason and so on.
Yes,
how
but
does
it
that
doesn't.
fit
No,
in?
it doesn't. I mean, and I think there's no secret. I believe. I don't. You're more up to date than I. When I was in Mason, they bore it. When you said was bearing in mind the traditional penalty of obligation, getting round that. I believe there's something rather modern happening
Yes.
now to sort of modify this very sort of blood curdling. But you know, this is all part of the secret and the fun, I think.
Fun, yeah.
And you see, what happens within any, and you probably mentioned your initiation, you are, you know, you mentioned you come in penniless, no metal about you, you're poor and slipshod and all that sort of thing. So there's this humiliation, which is a sort of great sort of psychological approach, even at the primitive time. You know, you are made to feel a bit of a Charlie, you know, and it's all a bit odd, and you don't know quite what's happening, so you are humiliated. And then, you know, you are gradually sort of raised slightly above this humiliation, and you take your obligation, again humiliated. And this is all part, I think, of the bonding or binding cult, which is a very clever bit of sort of
All men are equal.
psychological. It's a bit of psychological. It's the reducing down, all right. And I think not only reducing down, I think it is a bit of humiliation. You know,
But like being in the British Army, really.
But
Well,
it-
yes,
it
yes,
is
it
to
is.
make-
It's
it
exactly
is
the
to
same
make
thing.
certain that all men are equal. I absolutely agree.
That they've
with
all
you.
been through an
They've all been-
abnegating, humiliating experience
That's
in front
right.
of. They are blindfolded in the first
Yeah.
degree.
but in front of their peers, so they don't know quite who's there and what the hell is happening. So it is slightly nerve-wracking, and there's always these vague threats of what's going to happen in the third degree. You know, people make vague threats, or you're going to suffer then, blah blah blah. All this is all part of, and I call it a game at that point. But this
But
this
discipline.
this makes the
Interesting.
bonding.
You call this a game. Hitherto, we have been obviously talking about Freemasonry in Britain. You've been talking about signs and symbols, and you've been using words like game and fun and so on and so forth. Let me ask Sir David, and let's, as it were, go abroad, and let's now examine for a moment the Calvi affair. There were suggestions, I know, that the fact that Calvi was found hanging under Blackfriars Bridge had a significance in the sense that the Blackfriar, I think, was the sign of the P2 Lodge. There were suggestions that the stones that he had in his
We don't know anything
the
about
stones that he had in his pockets were in some way a sign or a symbol of some sort of Masonic significance. Was it? Was that your view after being involved in that case?
I can't really say it was my view. It was a factor which you couldn't ignore in the whole setup. I mean, the whole. I suspect he was murdered. I don't think he committed suicide. I mean, I can't see why a man would walk 5 miles. Well, first of all, why a man would come to this country when he could have committed suicide where he was, just as conveniently. Then he gets on a plane and comes to this country, goes to a grotty hotel, and if he wanted to commit suicide, he could have done it in a most
Chelsea
pleasant
Close is
place.
a really excellent place to commit suicide.
Maybe the view from Blackfriars Bridge is better than most.
He then makes a journey of 5 miles to a bridge, and it's Blackfriars Bridge, and the theory is that he then, with great difficulty, having collected up bricks, hanged himself. I don't think that's right, and I do think that the fact that he was so intimately involved with the Propaganda 2 Lodge, which was nothing like English Masonry, it was a sinister thing. There's no doubt about that. The evidence is overwhelming. The fact that he was involved in that, you cannot discount this when you're considering whether he was murdered. And here is a man hanging over Blackfriars Bridge and the other things you've mentioned, which seem to be some indication, some possible indication, of a connection with the Italian lodge.
Tell us something about the Italian Lodge. I mean, what you say it was sinister. In what particular way?
Well, it
Paint
was
the
sinister
picture
in
of
the
it.
sense, as far as I recall it, it's what my contact with this is 6 years ago, and one of the problems with lawyers is that you learn all about a case for a while, and then when it's finished, you forget about it, which is probably just as well. But my recollection is that the lodge was formed in a way in which, nothing like England, where people were selected, and they were selected because of their prominence, because of their power, because of their availability for various
schemes of pecuniary advantage and things of that sort. The people who were running it, many of the people who were running it were frankly criminals. They were unscrupulous men, and there is no doubt that a lot of Italian crime was committed using this lodge as a cover. And Calvi had been prominent in that lodge. And when it was also, of course, Calvi also had close links with the Catholic Church and with Rome, and various things were done for the benefit of the papacy and through that lodge. I've no doubt a lot of people joined it because they thought they were, as Dan says, they were going to join something which would give them power and influence. But there's no doubt about it that the man who was running it, primarily, I think it was Gelli, who was the instigator of the modern operation of that lodge, was doing it for highly nefarious purposes. And one of the things, I suppose, which again comes to one's mind is that if one of their number lets the side down, whatever the English Freemasons may say in ritual, the Italian Freemasons go with do it in fact.
It sounds a bit like the mafia, really.
Well, yes,
sort of
and the fact that it was so Catholic.
Yeah.
I mean, until recently, Catholics weren't allowed to join English lodges.
No.
That's an interesting point, because I was a guest on a phone-in program recently, and the issue of influence within the police service in various areas came up. And the question was raised, what about the Catholic Guild? And the Catholic Guild, I always felt, was not a secretive organization. And what I said was I felt that if Catholics couldn't belong to an exclusive organization like Freemasonry, where they might perceive they couldn't get on because they weren't part of that exclusive organization, then they would surely try and find some other area where they could assist each other. But in doing so, in being members of the Catholic Guild, they were following their religion quite openly. And the distinction I made was that the Catholic Guild would be open. They may well be influenced there as a result of brotherhood, whereas the Freemasonry membership, which was largely secretive, I mean, I didn't know who the Freemasons were around me. 27 years in the police force, I heard occasionally people talking about it. But if you don't take a particular interest in something, except to, you know it's around you, you don't pay particular attention to it, and consequently, those who are very interested in Freemasonry and finding out what it was all about would have known who the Masons were. I was in a CID office, and I couldn't have told you when I was at Kensington or anywhere else who the Masons were. They said, well, didn't you realize they dressed up in their suits on certain days and had these cases? So I said, for all I know, they could have been going to...
He's got a nose for it.
They could have been going to...
But would you have known who the left-wing politicians were?
Yes, they wear red ties. And the Masons wear black ties.
In the office. In the office.
Or outside the office?
There are no left-wing politicians.
No, but the point is that you would have thought that it would be at least of some significance on the files of a significant police force, because there's a lot of things collected, you know, on the files of police forces that are of less significance than that, aren't they? And people know him to know.
We're not getting into politics now this time.
Yes, the point I was trying to make was that if there is a group within the police force who perceive themselves to be disadvantaged because perhaps their religion doesn't allow them to belong to...
I would doubt that a Roman Catholic would feel himself disadvantaged because he was not sinning.
No, I think that...
We seem to be here in a sense to be... No, can I just...
Yes.
Sorry. We seem to be drawing back to religion a little. Let me come back, if I may, to Sir David and just return for a moment.
Sir David, one
No.
point, but is this the same as the French sort of 18th century, sort of French Revolution, when the Masonic lodge, is this the similar sort of connection as that with the Italian? Was it the same?
Well, and it's not very, very confusing. There's the major schism in Freemasonry is between what the English and American and the Scotch and the Irish like to call regular Freemasonry, and so-called Grand Orient Freemasonry. In France, the evil French are often denigrated by regular Freemasonry, because about 100 years ago, the Grand Orient of France decided that they would take the supreme architect, they would take God out of the rituals. And this, although Freemasonry is not a religion, it seemed like a heresy against Freemasonry to take the supreme architect out. In fact, in France, many politicians are Freemasons. They publicly, they're known to be Freemasons, and
this is sort of the age of reason extended into Freemasonry.
Yes, and you know, it's been a very powerful political force of a quasi-revolutionary nature in France. Now, very confusingly, the main lodge in Italy is called the Grand Orient, but it's a regular Masonic order, and it is in amity with the Grand Lodge of England. And so, since about 1972, I think it is, English Freemasonry and Italian Freemasonry have recognized each other. Mussolini had, of course, suppressed Freemasonry. It was legalized in 1945 or 46, partly because the Americans saw it as a way, rather like the mafia, to combat communism. The P2 Lodge, although it is generally denigrated as being acting in a most treacherous non-Masonic manner, was in fact a regular lodge of regular Freemasonry in Italy. And therefore there was a point for about 10 years when P2 was in a sense in perfect amity with English Freemasonry. Now, it so happened that Licio Gelli ran it in such a sort of impresario manner. I mean, many of the Masons that he recruited, many of the people he recruited into Freemasonry were known as Masons of memory, which meant simply that they were all in his memory. I mean, he knew who he had inducted into Freemasonry, and part of the device was that their names would never go on any public documents, because that would have overwhelmed the main point of the lodge, which was basically to subvert Italian society. It was a plot to usurp the state, and indeed there was a parliamentary report published in Italy which shows that it was a subversive. It was basically a neo-fascist organization, again to combat the moves within Italy to bring the communists into government in what was going to be called the historic compromise. One of the reasons why Aldo Moro was murdered. I'm not saying he was murdered by P2, but it was the same force, the determination to keep the communists out of government. And it so happens American intelligence was involved as well. It was this historic American position ever since World War II to keep the communists out of power in Italy. After a number of years, P2 was seen to be naughty. It was dissolved. Therefore, Grand Orient of Italy and the Grand Lodge of England can now disown it completely. But two Grand Masters of Italian Freemasonry were heavily involved with Licio Gelli. They're both dead, by the way, so no libel actions there. They were heavily involved with Licio Gelli. Gelli was sponsored by one, and he dominated another, and in the end, the second man had to be cast out, you see. But now Italian Freemasonry appears to be clean. But what's so astonishing about P2 is that although the lodge has been dissolved, many of the Masons in it are still Freemasons. I mean, I'm sure the canon would know from English Freemasonry that while a lodge can be, you can leave a lodge, but you're still a Freemason. So the fact that P2 has been dissolved doesn't mean to say that all these gangsters, crooks, mafiosi, bent politicians, crooked journalists that all belong to P2. They're still Masons, and they have infiltrated other lodges.
They've reformed, of course.
It is only right to point out, and I don't in any way, I'm not disagreeing in any way with what you've said, that at the point where Gelli came in and brought in all the crooks and then began to run it as a sort of mafia, it really lost its meaning as a Masonic lodge. So it would be wrong to give the impression that it had continued within the framework of ordinary Masonry.
They were happy to take his dues. Licio Gelli was still sending the subscriptions through to the Grand Master, and he was happy to take the money. It went right the way through up till about 1981.
If you want to have a really corrupt fantasy, this is obviously all the money's in the Orient Express, and that's why it's so called, you see, when they travel from Grand Lodge.
So David, let me ask you this question. you've made it fairly clear that in your view the P2 Lodge was very much out on its own, and it was acting in a way which was clearly illegal, and there was, in your view, much evidence for that. And you've drawn a very strong distinction between P2 and English Freemasonry. I think it's fair to say that the investigation into the death of Calvi in this country, carried out by the city police, came very much to the opposite conclusion to the one that you outlined earlier on, i.e. that he was not murdered. Do you think there's any way at all in which Freemasons from P2 could have had any kind of contact with Freemasons in the City of London police to, if you like, put the police off the scent of what really happened to Roberto Calvi?
No, I saw no evidence of that at all. I mean, there were things which I could criticise, and if necessary I will criticise in the investigation into that incident. But I think it largely comes, this is another example of what Colin was saying earlier, it largely comes from the attitude of the police, which you can understand, is who on earth was it who dumped this body on my bailiwick? And now I've got to go around and do all this investigating, I've got to go dashing off to Italy. And initially I had a feeling there was a reluctance to get on with the job, but it was nothing to do with Freemasonry.
Probably suspected it was the Metropolitan Police who did it.
Like moving the drunk across the boundary.
That's right.
Well, if he'd been 50 yards down the bridge, it would have been in the
But you see,
Metropolitan.
if you follow it up, follow on from that, if someone could have found some evidence that there was a Masonic connection, that someone involved in the City of London Police, has now little doubt may have been the case, was a Freemason, they said, oh, that's why it is exactly as you were saying. Whereas in reality, it was just a strong dose of inertia.
There's nothing creates a thorough and powerful investigation so much as the certainty that your case will be reinvestigated. And you put all these connotations through. Whoever was given that had the certainty that there would be the possibility not only of a reinvestigation but all sorts of other inquiries going on. And that really is quite a healthy situation. It's one I relied on greatly.
But would you not have thought that perhaps the investigation might have been carried out a little more forcefully, shall we say?
Well, I don't know whether you get a chap to swear he's not a Mason before you give him an inquiry. It's getting a bit odd.
A bit improper, isn't it?
Well, it might mean, of course, that some chaps would never do anything. I find that sort of connotation that there is somehow or another, you can fix something. Anyone who's really been involved in the Director of Public Prosecution or been a senior officer, you read statements, you don't read reports, and statements go and questions follow certain patterns, and if they don't follow the pattern, you get the other statements, and you know whether you've got something that makes sense or doesn't. And if you're any good at your job at all, it really sticks out. I've spent a young man in promotion. It's now done much better by civilians as a staff officer on disciplinary matters. And you would have to be very thick not to be able to see something quite artificial going on. I mean, there's an interrogation, there's an interrogator, and there is someone recording it. Nowadays, thank goodness, it's all done with tape recorders.
Is that your experience, Brian Muller?
I don't quite follow your pattern
I'm
of thought.
saying if one has a major investigation, which there are doubts,
Yes.
merely by looking at the statements, the way they are performed, and the way the interrogation flows,
Yes.
if it's done falsely or dishonestly, there will be a place where you should go on and it stops. There will be something for someone, certainly with your experience, where you would look at it and say, I don't like it. And then if you've got a well-run organisation, a reinvestigation and discrediting are all concerned. I mean, that's the hazardous life in which people live in doing their investigations.
The investigation I was conducting, when I was removed from it, another officer, of course, had to take it over. He was allocated it. The fact that he happened to be a Freemason may have been nothing that he could do anything about if he was given the job to do and was a Freemason in the department. But an officer working with him on that investigation, who had worked under me on the same investigation, came to see me when there was this sudden juxtaposition of from being a CID officer to becoming a uniform officer again after 22 years. And he complained to me about the unprofessional way in which the investigation was continuing and the manner in which the inquiries were being conducted and the questioning was taking place. And he was so concerned about it that he came to see me to report it. I had already at that time been seeking redress through channels, first of all within the police service and then outside through my local MP. And I reported the matter to him. And the message I got from the officer was that this inquiry is being buried.
Well, that's what makes me sad about it, without making any judgments, is the concept that there isn't anyone in the whole of this, very large hierarchy where I think there's been a fair demonstration of goodwill on the part of people at the top to deal with issues. There wasn't anyone you could go to, and you had to start off on your own. I'm sad about that, but that's all, because there are the skills. That's the point I'm making. There are skills to tell, and you don't have to be very clever either to see whether the investigations follow the way it should. It will stand up and ring a bell at you.
Let me ask this of each of you, in a sense. Perhaps beginning with you gentlemen who have either been in the Masons or have that much more experience of them. Do you think that in any sense there is a loyalty that is called for or encouraged within Masonry that goes beyond the law?
Not according to Masonic obligations. Now, I think some people may take it to ridiculous extremes, but in fact, in the pure word, or the pure milk of the Masonic word, no. Because that sort of protection, if you like, is written into the obligation and the promises you make. But, as anything, there will be sort of people who go to extremes and carry it beyond that, because they will become, hooked on Masonry, as people become hooked on all sorts of things, and it becomes obsessive. And one can sort of think of Masons who are going to be seen at their Masonic lodge sort of 5 nights a week at the expense of their wives and families, which is totally against, and I'm sure there are, perhaps there aren't enough lodges for women Masons to do that. But there were people, will get hooked on it and get carried away. But this is not the intention of Masonry itself.
And it isn't peculiar to Masonry.
No, it's not.
I mean,
Those golf balls.
I mean, people who form close associations within a profession, within a club, you will get some people who are a bit unbalanced and will carry it too far. Indeed,
Some people spend their whole time going to religious services. Other people.
I mean,
People go to
I don't
sports
say
clubs
this
every
is
night
true,
of
but
the
I've
week.
heard it suggested that there was an occasion when, in the law, somebody said, "Well, that mustn't happen to that chap because he's one of us." I mean, it can happen, and it shouldn't happen. But you don't condemn the whole system because someone is nutty enough to go over the top, or
I mean, you
wicked
don't
enough.
condemn soccer because lunatics get carried away with their support, their loyal, over loyal to their clubs, and the police have great problems with this. But you don't condemn soccer as such, to put it on a sort of more simple level.
That's right.
One wonders about conflict of interest, though. I mean, the judge that you referred to obviously didn't face a conflict of interest, or at least he did in the sense that he was concerned, but I mean, eventually still, as you say, came up with the relevant sentence. But do you think judges face a conflict of interest in that sense, judges who are Freemasons?
I think, again, it depends on the individual. I mean, if a man, I can't understand how anyone can build up that amount of emotion in Freemasonry, because it just doesn't appeal to me in that way. I suppose somebody who is an ardent Freemason will feel terribly hurt to see damage being done to another Freemason. But you see, you have also to bring into the balance another factor which does provide the balance, and that is there are a lot of people who feel like that, who are all the more harsh with the chap who lets the side down.
He's let the side down, absolutely.
I mean, the other one who went the other way would be a very poor judge. I mean, to let his...
Precisely.
And there's that phrase and the ritual about one's public or private avocation, which is sort of very much written in. I forget where it comes now, but there is this sort of phrase, in fact, that you are not supposed to let it interfere with your public
I mean,
or
you
private...
only have to take,
All right,
my,
it happens.
take my own profession. I mean, if a solicitor or a barrister breaks the law, or if a policeman breaks the law and he comes before a court, he really has a double jeopardy, because not only is he going to lose his job, but also he's going to get a worse punishment because he's so let the side down.
Yes, I'd like to put on the record, you know, there's another oath the policeman takes. I know it's very, very obvious towards impartiality and the rest of it. And no, I don't see why one should be seen necessarily to counsel the other. I take your point about conflict. I take the point that there should be concern if that principle, duty of impartiality, should be got at or modified or anything else. I think that's very proper. There should be worry that the police should be impartial.
But Martin, I mean,
yes.
in terms of the
Yeah.
actual oath that is sworn, I mean, I don't know the exact words, but I mean, my understanding is that it goes that the oath of allegiance is up to, but not to include murder and treason. Is
Yes,
that right?
I mean, I think that formally, it has to be said there is no Masonic oath which condones criminality. There is, firstly, you're not meant to commit crime, but also you're meant to put the laws of the country, but also the Queen and the family, your own personal family. You're to do nothing which prejudices your family, your obligation as a citizen, or your duty to the royal family. I mean, this is all, as far as I recall, it's all expressed in a lecture given by a senior member of the lodge at the installation of the new master, which occurs in every lodge once a year.
New member. That's all given to a new member.
No, but it's actually expressed in a particular speech in the male Freemasonry at the annual installation after the new master has been
To the new
installed.
member, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry too that we seem to be disagreeing on this. But one thing, I mean, you raised the point that the policeman takes an oath.
Right, and I should also take the point that if he perverts the course of justice, that's criminal.
Yes,
That's right.
but of course it was a Commissioner of Metropolitan Police who did point out that these two oaths may be incompatible, and this is the book concerned.
The Code of Ethics, yes.
The principles of policing and guidance for professional behaviour, and the wording of several paragraphs here is absolutely sharp on that. I understand that this section of this book was written by Albert Lahn, who was for a while, for a couple of years, Deputy Commissioner. And he, in a very humane and understanding manner, pointed out that there were conflicts. He also pointed out that justice, a police officer may not actually, through Freemasonry, be determined to subvert the law or to show favour, but it might be perceived as such.
So that's the important.
Yes.
Albert Lahn's one of the most marvellous men and irreproachable to every possible degree. And he felt, in sitting in when he was doing that job, that this really ought to be pointed out. He obviously had some idea that we might be sitting here tonight, you know.
See, I tell you what I find very strange. You see, Colin, you're obviously such an eminently reasonable person. And
well, thank you.
you're obviously saying
flattery. There's going to be lights now going in the set.
You're using words like there may be a conflict. Now, if what we're talking about in Freemasonry is something which our friends here are describing as fun, bit of a game, so on and so forth, then why is it that so many police officers jeopardise what you describe as a possible conflict just for a game or a bit of fun?
Well, it's because they are exactly the same human beings who do all of these things. I mean, I can introduce you to dozens of policemen who I believe haven't got very far, haven't had very successful careers, who I have every reason to believe are Masons. You know, so if it obviously didn't do them any good, but they got satisfactions from it. I have had friends who tell me they're Masons, who are marvellous people. But there are, in a police force the size of ours, as we've said all along, in all walks of life, there will be people who will, no doubt, use any means to an end. And if they're dishonest, they will use this to an end. I think it would be foolish for any senior officer to blind himself to that fact. And I think Bert Lahn, not everybody in the police service thought that was necessary. probably feeling it might be another stick to hit the unfortunate policeman, you know. Ask him in court before he gives it, have you been complained about? Are you being investigated? Are you a Freemason? Have you read Bert Lahn's book? You know, there is a kind of defensive thing in the police. But I, myself personally, I quite understand. It was an interesting thing on how you live with the community that the police senior officers of that time thought, well, let's try and get a code of ethics up. It's not enough to have a discipline code, it's not enough to take the oath. Let's really try and give that sort of lead and guidance. Because today, they were saying, it's even more difficult to take the public with you. It's even more difficult to assure the community because we're in a consumer society. We've done away with most grave injustices, so let's bash the policeman. You know, that's the sort of feeling. And this is a wise and sensible officer trying to just say, you've got to take the public with you, and this is one. Not because necessarily he had any great anxiety, but because of what might be perceived to be a conflict. And I think perhaps this evening proves he is right.
I think there are various conflicts.
It doesn't prove that it doesn't prove anything else.
I think it's rather sad that in all this discussion, and we've been at it some hours now, that not one person has mentioned the charitable work that Masons do.
Well, I did mention it.
You did mention it very briefly. And I do feel that it is a pity because knowing that Masonry binds, well, men presumably, certainly women, of sort of wide diversity who probably, you know, put £1 in an envelope that gets shoved through the door, if it's shoved through the door, or buy a flag on Flag Day. But because they're in the Masonic and it's one of their aims and objects, do in fact do a tremendous lot of work for charity.
Dan was talking about a while ago about, you know, the Rotary openly shaking boxes under people's noses. I think the difference that Masonry raise it from themselves.
Exactly.
They don't go and
to outside
nag at the public.
No.
And I think the other thing I would like to say, that I'm out of it, certainly some years ago, Masonry became more open, certainly as charitable giving. Now, they are, I think I'm right in saying, you know, they have given or are giving in the Diocese of Peterborough £5,000, I think it's 5,000, I hope I'm not underestimating it, to the cathedral. I know that when I was in Mason, they gave a lot of money to Carlisle Cathedral. When I was in Mason, they bought a lifeboat. Now, these are totally non-Masonic things, so there is, and I think this is compared to the last probably 15 years, in that sort of level, but this is money which they have raised from themselves, rather than, and I'm not saying it's wrong to go around shaking boxes under people's noses, but it's their own money. It's not other people's money that they've raised.
And
because
ours
I think
has
there is
never been from Masonic. I mean, at the moment we're busy raising money for some specialist cancer equipment, which is, I suppose, has a womanly connotation. And as you know, when you have chemotherapy, you tend to lose your hair, and somebody's invented this marvellous machine that it sort of freezes the head while you're having it, so you don't lose your hair. And we felt that this was something that would help a woman in those sort of circumstances, to not lose her hair.
Point, because it's been worrying me a bit sitting listening about the conflict of interest and the question of perception. And what I've been asking myself is this: should you change laws, and should you deny a policeman the right to be a Mason, because someone says that there may be perceived to be a conflict of interest? And so I think what one has to ask oneself is, what do you mean by a perception in that context? And you don't mean an unreasonable perception. It's got to be, for this purpose, not some witch hunt or some curious, unbalanced view of it. It's got to be a perception based upon reasonable grounds. Now, if someone were to come to me, or had ever come to me, with evidence that there were a significant number of cases where the evidence showed that because of Freemasonry something wrong had occurred, then I would think that the perception and the risk that justice was not seen to be done becomes meaningful. But I think that what we've been listening to and discussing this evening doesn't get within that frame.
Could there be anything else that persuades you? Could there be, for example, not just evidence of misdeeds, but, for example, something that was perhaps philosophical or structural about the organisation that persuaded you that...
Yes, if there was something, if, for example, the oath which a Freemason took, as someone was suggesting might have been the case, and he put that down pretty quickly, involved enabling your colleague to break the law, enabling your colleague to perpetuate injustice or to bring about injustice, then I would say, pretty damn quick, let's get rid of it. Let's stop people joining that who are going to be and have anything to do, certainly, with the administration of justice. But it's got to get to the stage where there is some evidence, because let me take
criminal intent,
of some sort of something of that sort. Let me take the obverse side of the coin. I think I've mostly been on for the defence this evening, but I mean there are, as there are in all occupations, policemen and lawyers and other people who don't obey the rules. And of course, one of the difficulties of a police officer who's fighting crime is that he can't. He's in a great difficulty if he's going to fight crime always with the gloves on. The other chap's taken them off, and he's got to fight them with them on, and therefore things happen that shouldn't.
Is that not what we require in a democracy, though?
Well, that may be what we do, but you see, what I was really going to say is this: that if the tenets of Freemasonry are teaching good things, and no one has so far demonstrated to me that the tenets of Freemasonry do not do that, the man may be a better person as a policeman for being a Freemason than if you deny him the right to think that way.
If it was known, though, if he was a declared Freemason, so that everyone was aware of his commitment and within limits the oath he had taken, insofar as they know what it is, I think then there can be no argument. But if, for instance, you were a militant anti-Mason and the judge was a Mason and no one knew, or significantly no one on the jury knew, or the people in the dock didn't know, then I think I can't see any argument against the declaration of interest, because if I can pick up your point...
Would you just allow me to interrupt you before you go on?
Yes.
I'll give you one argument against which might convince you. And that is this argument, that in this country we keep certain things from the jury. One of them is that a man has previously been convicted unless certain other things happen. And the reason we keep those things from the jury is because, human nature being what it is recognized that the ordinary person may place undue weight on something which a more experienced and rational person would not. And the danger of what you are advocating is that if you then had somebody cross-examined, are you a Freemason? And is he a Freemason? There's a very strong risk of injustice, because the jury might attach more weight to it than they should, just as you, as a sensible, intelligent man, tend to do the same.
And if Diane was good, that you'd also have it of every juror. We have to ask that question as well.
I think, ladies and gentlemen, our conversation is drawing towards a natural close.
We're all getting tired.
Before we finish, I would like to give, obviously, everybody a last chance to say something. But I think the question that I'd sort of like each of us to address, if we may, as we briefly go around the table, is whether we have in any way been won over or moved our positions slightly during the evening in terms of the discussion that we've heard from others who perhaps disagree with us. Canon, let's start with you.
Interestingly, because since I resigned from Freemasonry, I've never discussed it at all with anyone. And so, in fact, I was surprised to find how defensive I was of the craft, having come up for a number of reasons. I think this is perhaps interesting from my point of view, because I shut it out of my experience. I've had to look at it tonight, and so that's perhaps interesting from my point of view. I'm not going back in it.
Martin.
Well, I think that, unfortunately, because we can't get into specifics, but equally we're accused of not producing the evidence if we generalise, there are certain things that we haven't said. I mean, Sir David Napley rightly points out that we don't want policemen to fight crime with gloves on. What worries me is that sometimes they fight crime with the white gloves of Freemasonry on. And there are specific lodges, and I can name them, but I won't, because we don't want to get into specifics, but there are lodges where armed robbers and policemen are jointly members. And after one man, not long ago,
churches as well.
not long ago, emerged from well, yes, but Freemasonry. You see, the Church of England. I mean, you embrace the fallen man, but Freemasonry doesn't have that let out. Once you've broken the law, you're out. Now, unfortunately, when it comes to practice, lodges often don't fling out the robbers. And in fact, one man, having spent a number of years detained at Her Majesty's pleasure, has gone back into the lodge, which still has policemen in it, and I find this absolutely extraordinary. I find it absolutely extraordinary that there is a lodge which has people who arrange contracts for the Ministry of Defence. They are civil servants in certain government departments which dish out contracts. And in the same lodge, there are people who represent the contracting companies. I can think of no legitimate purpose which these two groups of people who ought to be at arm's length have doing together in a private gathering. I happen to have fallen across the documentation. I find it extraordinary, and nothing, in my opinion, can condone it.
Dan Smith.
Well, I just come to the point of where this principle of the declaration of interest is concerned. I think that it is a serious point that's worthy of consideration. And I think that the Canon has convinced me of the justice of his decision to resign, and that is significant. That is significant to me. If he will accept from me that there are many people in the contracting industry that break just as many rules, and then I'll go home and sleep happily.
Sir David Napley.
No, I don't think that I've really had any evidence which has caused me to change my mind. I don't think that I've had any solid, cogent fact which causes me to alter my mind. I think the only thing that emerges from my point of view is that I think the fact that the canon resigned must have been a great loss to his colleagues.
Well, I'd go along with that. Yes, I'm now much better informed about Freemasonry than I was before I came here. But nothing has happened to make me feel that the assumptions I had are changed. I would like to say I would like to thank Sir David for his concern about the basic rights of policemen. They do go up quite a lot. They don't strike, as you know. Yeah. I mention this because you might have noticed they're rather well paid. They can't take part in political activities, obviously, be there. And I don't think there's no prohibition about being a Mason. But I think the thought that officers deciding whether or not that's the path they wanted to follow has rightly been drawn to their attention. But I'm sorry not to have to be changed on anything.
Don't be sorry. Don't be sorry.
I'm only going to say that over many years, various male Masons have said to me, of course, our Grand Lodge doesn't recognise you. And listening to the discussions tonight, I'm beginning to feel that it's a blessing rather than anything else. Because if in fact these allegations, and they can only remain as allegations as they rest on the table tonight, of some of the goings on in the men's lodges, I can only say that although the women came into the thing a couple of 100 years after the men, they seem to really be following the true principles of Masonry, as I see them anyway, than the men.
Right, any changes?
I have felt that this was the wrong forum in which to go into the whole background of my case in any depth. For one thing, I was sensitive to the fact that this good lady here was in a minority, and she didn't realise I was a splendid policeman coming to sit beside her and talk. And I felt it was not the right place to hog the conversation and go off in a long monologue, because there were other people here who obviously wanted to discuss these issues concerning Freemasonry and the rituals of Freemasonry. I'm more concerned about the influences of Freemasonry, and I can only go by my personal experiences and the effect upon me of events as a result of the action that I took so long ago. And it has been a horrifying experience. But this is not the right place to bring it out in detail, and I feel that it would have to be done in some other way.
Tell us this as a final thought. What is your prognosis of where your case goes from here?
Well, the reason I appeared on this programme in the first place is because Council has advised me to seek the cooperation of members of the public, public servants, police officers, members of both Houses of Parliament, and also members of the legal profession, to write into Austin Mitchell, written endorsements submitted to Austin Mitchell, in support of a judicial review of the Home Secretary's decision not to order an inquiry into the influences of Freemasonry in the Metropolitan Police. The other initiative for which I was asked to seek these endorsements was in fact for an examination of my case based upon my parliamentary petition by a parliamentary all-party and bicameral committee of inquiry for consideration of the modification of the Parliamentary Commissioner's remit, because as a result of my meanderings through the processes of seeking justice, I have discovered that police officers and all public servants are in a very peculiar area. They're almost second-class citizens in the area of natural justice. And what has happened is that since the Parliamentary Commissioner was given his remit in 1967, his remit...
This is the Ombudsman, isn't it?
His remit has excluded categories of complaints which fall in a public service personnel category. And the inquiries I've made show that an average of over one complaint per week is referred by members of Parliament to the Parliamentary Commissioner, and the Parliamentary Commissioner has commented on this in 1982 in his annual report to Parliament, and said many of these complaints are seemingly deserving, with which he had sympathy and regretted having to turn away, but he had no remit from Parliament to deal with them.
So your hope is that what you will be able to achieve in due course is that there
by
will
accident, I've discovered that there's over 4 million public servants in this country, and if you were to add the number of police officers, it would come to something like 4,300,000, who may make complaints of maladministration, misuse and abuse of power against their own administrations. And if the administration has, say, an overseeing ministerial body which denies them, for whatever reason, they may consider it legitimate, denies them redress or adequate redress, there's nowhere else for them to go. And I feel that in this sort of enclosed atmosphere, there could be a tendency, I'm not saying there necessarily is, but there could be a tendency for departments to behave in a way towards those who work in those departments other than fairly. And the concept of having a parliamentary commissioner for the public servant and police is this: if you have a independent, completely independent department overseeing the areas of the public service and the police forces of this country, to which public servants can go with their complaints, having exhausted their own redress procedures, not just willy-nilly, there may be, some of those complaints may be quite valid, and the complaints that are not examined properly within the vested interest areas of their own organizations may be seen to have some merit.
Why not a Bill of Rights? I mean,
well, you're going along those lines, and I think that
we will obviously watch with interest as your case progresses, Brian. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank all of you for a fascinating discussion. Let me tell you, more than anything else, that I certainly learnt a great deal. Thank you all very much indeed. We'll be back next week with another edition of After Dark. If you've remained with us until now, do try and join us again then. Good night.